In the darkest corners of the world, where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, there exists an ancient manuscript that whispers ancestral secrets and eternal truths. This text, a legacy of wisdom wrapped in mystery, is known as the Sermon on the Mount. Legends tell that this sermon, spoken millennia ago by an enlightened man on a solitary hill, holds the keys to the universe itself. Its author, Emmet Fox, scholar and mystic, guides us through a spiritual journey that transcends time and space. Listen closely as Fox's words transport you to unknown inner landscapes where eternal principles intertwine with individual destinies. Each chapter is a door opening to deep understanding of human and divine nature, challenging our perceptions and revealing truths that have been hidden for centuries. Step into this text as one ventures into an enchanted forest where each phrase is a whisper of wind laden with cosmic meaning. As you progress, you will sense the ancient presence of sages who sought truth and found answers in the simple yet profound teachings of the Sermon on the Mount. Prepare for an unforgettable journey into the unknown, where ancestral knowledge meets inner exploration. Discover how these ancient words can transform your perception and bring light to the darkest corners of your soul. Preface. This current book represents the essence drawn from many years dedicated to the study of vibration and metaphysics, as well as from numerous lectures I have delivered. It would have been easier to make it twice as long, but my aim is to provide the reader with a practical manual within minimal space. As any good student knows, simplicity of expression is most useful in mastering any subject. Do not think you can absorb everything it contains in 1 or 2 readings. It is necessary to constantly review it until you grasp the new perspective on life and the entirely new values that the Sermon on the Mount presents to humanity. This is how you will experience a rebirth. Studying the Bible is not like searching for diamonds in South Africa. Initially, people found a few diamonds in yellow clay, rejoicing at their luck, even when they realized that was all they would find. However, by digging deeper, they discovered blue clay and, to their amazement, in one day, found as many gemstones as they had previously found in a year. What seemed like wealth before was reduced to insignificance when it came to exploring biblical truth. Do not settle for the yellow clay of a few spiritual discoveries. Instead, continue to delve until reaching the richer blue clay below. The Bible, however, differs from the diamond field in that beneath the blue clay lie ever richer layers awaiting spiritual perception, and so on infinitely. When you read the Bible, continually affirm that divine wisdom enlightens you. This is how direct inspiration is attained. Chapter 1. What Jesus Taught Us. Jesus Christ is undoubtedly the most significant figure in human history, regardless of how he is considered, whether as God or as a man. Whether viewed as one of the greatest prophets and teachers of the world, or simply as a well-intentioned fanatic who ended in pain, failure, and ruin after a brief and troubled public career. Regardless of how he is considered, the life and death of Jesus and the teachings attributed to him have had more influence on human history than any other man who has ever lived, more than Alexander, Caesar, Charlemagne, Napoleon, or Washington combined. His doctrines, or at least those attributed to him today, have influenced more lives, more books are written, read, and bought about him. More speeches, call them sermons, are delivered than about all other men mentioned together. Having been the religious inspiration of the entire European race during the 2 millennia, when this race dominated and shaped the destinies of the entire world, culturally, socially, and politically, as well as during the period when the entire surface of the earth was finally discovered and occupied, just as in its vast outlines shaped by civilization gives him alone the right to the first place in the world. Therefore, there can be no more important task than to investigate what Jesus really represented, what he actually taught us, what he truly wished us to believe, what were his true goals in his heart, to what extent he really succeeded in achieving those goals in his life and death, to what extent the religion or movement called Christianity, throughout its 19 centuries of existence, has really expressed or represented his ideas, to what extent present-day Christianity communicates his message to the world. If he were to return now, what would he think of the self-proclaimed Christian nations in general, as well as Christian churches in particular, Anglicans, Baptists, Catholics, Greek Orthodox, Methodists, Presbyterians, Quakers, Salvationists, Seventh-day Adventists or Unitarians? What teaching did Jesus give us? This is the question I have set out to answer throughout this book. I propose to show that the message Jesus brought has a unique and special value because it is truth, as well as the only perfect statement of the nature of God, man, life, and the world. Just as relationships exist between them, we will discover further that his teachings are not a mere abstract account of the universe that would arouse purely academic interest. On the contrary, they constitute a practical method for the development of the soul, as well as for shaping our lives and destinies towards the things we truly desire. Jesus explains to us the nature of God and our own nature, the meaning of life and death. He teaches us why we make mistakes, why we succumb to temptation, why we fall ill, become poor, and grow old. And above all, he tells us how to overcome all these evils and how to bring health, happiness, and true prosperity into our lives and the lives of others if we truly desire it. That said, we can now highlight a fundamental aspect that it is crucial to understand, which means departing from all ordinary presuppositions of orthodoxy. The fact to emphasize is that Jesus taught no theology. Jesus' teaching is entirely of a spiritual or metaphysical nature. Unfortunately, historical Christianity has been largely concerned with theological and doctrinal questions that, strangely, play no role in the teaching of the gospel. It will surprise many well-intentioned people to know that all church doctrines and theologies are human inventions, devised by their authors from their own prejudices and imposed on the Bible from the outside. However, there is absolutely no system of theology or doctrine found in the Bible simply because it is not present there. Good men who felt the need for an intellectual explanation of life, and who also believed that the Bible was a revelation of God to man, drew the natural conclusion that one must be within the other. More or less unconsciously, they then tried to fabricate what they wanted to find. They lacked the spiritual or metaphysical key because it was not where they sought it. Therefore, they sought a purely intellectual or three-dimensional explanation of life, which is impossible. The fact that man possesses essentially a spiritual and eternal life explains the true nature of his existence, while this world and the life we intellectually understand represent, so to speak, only a cross-section of the whole truth concerning him. However, a cross-section of anything from a machine to a horse can never provide even a partial explanation of the entirety, looking at a small corner of the universe and doing so with half-opened eyes, starting from an exclusively anthropocentric and geocentric point of view. Thus, man has constructed fables, as absurd as they are horrible, about a limited and anthropomorphic God who ruled his universe in a way very similar to how a somewhat barbaric prince might govern the affairs of a small oriental kingdom. To this God, all kinds of human weaknesses were attributed, such as vanity, inconstancy, and resentment. Later, a wildly incongruous legend was built around the original sin, vicarious atonement by blood, infinite punishment for finite transgressions, and in some cases, an indescribably terrifying doctrine of predestination to eternal torture or eternal bliss was added. However, this theory is never taught in the Bible. If the purpose of the Bible were to teach it, it would be perfectly set out in a chapter, but this is not the case. The prominent salvation plan in evangelical sermons and theology books of an earlier generation is as unknown in the Bible as in the Quran. There has never been such an agreement in the universe. The Bible absolutely does not teach it. On the contrary, some obscure texts from Genesis, a few random phrases from Paul's letters, and one or two isolated verses from other parts of the Scriptures might be extracted and assembled by theologians to produce the type of teaching they believe should be in the Bible. In contrast, Jesus knows nothing of all this. He is anything but an optimist, as generally stated, or an ordinary optimist. He warns us, not once but several times, that obstinacy in sin brings very severe punishment, just as it happens to the man who separates himself from the integrity of his soul. Even if he gained the whole world, he would be a tragic fool. However, Jesus teaches that we are truly punished only for our sins, and he teaches that every man or woman, however imbued with evil and impurity, always has direct access to an almighty and loving God-Father, who will forgive him and give him his own strength to enable him to find himself, even up to 70 times, 7 times if necessary. Jesus has been sadly misinterpreted and distorted in other directions. For example, there is no justification in his teachings for the establishment of any form of ecclesiastical authority, hierarchy of officials, or ritual system. He approved none of this, and indeed his mindset is definitively anti-ecclesiastical. During his public life, he was in conflict with the Pharisees and other religious leaders of his own country. At first they hindered him, then persecuted him by perfectly healthy self-preservation instinct. They instinctively felt that the truth as he taught it marked the beginning of their end. That is why they eventually killed him. His claims of authority as God's representative were completely ignored, and for his rituals and ceremonies he showed only impatience and disdain. Human nature seems very inclined to believe what it wants to believe, rather than to do the work of truly scrutinizing the scriptures with an open mind. For example, perfectly sincere men have called themselves Christians and adorned themselves with the most impressive and pretentious titles to impress people, despite the fact that their master, in the clearest language, strictly instructed his disciples not to do this. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. Matthew 23:8. Furthermore, he denounced the Pharisees as hypocrites, for they loved the principal seats and imposed heavy and burdensome charges with all kinds of norms and regulations. As we will see later, Jesus did not demand strict adherence to rules. He insisted that a certain spirit prevail in everyone's conduct, seeking only to teach principles, aware that when the spirit is right, the details align with it. It is evident that the letter kills, but the spirit gives life, as sadly observed in the behavior of the Pharisees. However, despite this, Orthodox Christianity has attempted by all means to impose on the people all sorts of strict norms or rules. A striking example illustrating this is the Puritan attempt to impose the Old Testament Sabbath on Christians, even though it was clearly a purely Hebrew ordinance. Despite this, severe punishments were inflicted on those who did not adhere to it, although Jesus questioned the superstition of the Sabbath by saying that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. He clearly indicated throughout his teachings that the time had come for man to make every day a spiritual Sabbath, acting at all times in a spiritual context. It is evident that if the Hebrew Sabbath were mandatory for Christians, then now that they rest on Sunday, they continue to commit all the errors of breaking the Sabbath. There are many modern Christians who realize that there is no system of theology in the Bible unless someone deliberately wants to place it there, and they have practically abandoned theology. But they still cling to Christianity because they intuitively feel it is the truth. In reality, there is no logical justification for their attitude, since they do not possess the spiritual key that would make Jesus' teaching intelligible. They strive to rationalize their attitude in different ways. This is the dilemma of the man who lacks both the blind faith of orthodoxy and the spiritual interpretation of scientific Christianity to support himself. He has no support to rely on other than that of the outdated Unitarian, and if he does not completely reject miracles, he feels very uncomfortable with them. They embarrass him, and deep down he wishes they were not in the Bible and would rejoice in getting rid of them. A recent Life of Jesus published by a recognized cleric clearly illustrates how false this position is. The author admits in this book that Jesus may have healed certain people or helped them heal themselves, but he draws a line there. The other miracles he explains away as if they did not exist. According to him, these are the usual fantastic legends that surround all great historical figures. For example, consider what happened at the lake where the disciples were very frightened, but they thought of Jesus, and this thought calmed their fears. Later, this was exaggerated into an absurd story that he had personally come to them walking on water. Apparently, at another time, he reformed a sinner by bringing him out of the tomb of sin, and this was amplified years later into a ridiculous legend that he had actually brought a man back from the dead. Again, Jesus prayed fervently one night so that he was radiant with happiness, and Peter, who had remained asleep, woke up suddenly and years later recounted a confusing story that he believed he had seen Moses there, and so on and so forth. However, one must extend all sympathy, the special pleas of a man captivated by the beauty and mystery of the Gospels. Nevertheless, in the absence of the spiritual key, considering that his common sense and all of humanity's scientific knowledge carry much weight in these Gospels, this is simply not possible. The rest of the Gospel narrative loses all meaning if miracles never occurred, if Jesus did not believe they were possible and committed to performing them not sporadically, but constantly and repeatedly. If he did not believe and teach many things in blatant contradiction with the rationalist philosophy of the 18th and 19th centuries, the Gospel narrative is chaotic, contradictory. It lacks all sense. We cannot resolve this dilemma by saying that Jesus was not interested in the beliefs and superstitions of his time, that he more or less took them for granted, because what truly interested him was character. This argument is weak, as character must include an intelligent and vital response to life, which includes certain defined beliefs and convictions about things that truly matter. However, miracles did occur. All the works recounted of Jesus in the four Gospels did occur, and many others as well, which, if all were written down, I think would not fit within the breadth of the earth. Jesus himself justified what people considered strange and marvelous teachings by the works he was capable of doing. And he even declared to those who study and practice his teachings, "The works that I do, you will do also, and even greater." Yet who, after all, is a miracle? Those who deny the possibility of miracles based on the fact that the universe is a perfect system of laws and order in which there can be no exceptions are entirely correct. The explanation is that the world we usually know, whose laws are the only ones most people are familiar with, is but a fragment of the universe as it truly is. Hence, there exists an appeal from a lower law to a higher one, from a lesser expression to a greater. However, the appeal from the lower law to the higher is not truly a violation of law, for the possibility of this appeal is part of the fundamental constitution of the universe. Therefore, in the sense of a true violation of law, miracles are impossible. In the sense that all ordinary rules and limitations of the physical plane can be set aside and overridden by an understanding that surpasses them, miracles, in the common sense of the term, can and do occur in reality. Let's imagine, for example, that on any given Monday, your affairs are in such a state that it is humanly certain that certain consequences will occur before the end of the week. However, these may be legal consequences, perhaps very unpleasant following a court decision, or they may be certain physical consequences in the human body. It is possible that a competent physician may decide that a dangerous operation is absolutely necessary, and may even feel it is his duty to say there is no possibility for the patient to recover. But if someone can elevate their consciousness above the limitations of the physical plane regarding this matter, and this is merely a scientific description of what is commonly called prayer, the conditions on this plane would change in an unexpected and normally impossible way. The legal tragedy will disappear to the benefit of all parties involved in the case, or the patient will be healed instead of having to undergo the operation, or he will have to die, but in a different manner. Indeed, in other words, miracles in the popular sense of the term can occur and do occur as results of prayer. Prayer changes things. Praying causes things to happen in a very different way than they would have had prayer not been made. The type of difficulty encountered matters little, regardless of the causes that led you to this situation. Simply pray to get out of your problem if you are persistent enough in your appeal to God. Moreover, prayer is both a science and an art, and it is to the teaching of this science and art that Jesus devoted most of his ministry. If the miracles of the gospel occurred, it is because Jesus understood the spiritual world, which gave his prayer more power than anyone else's before or after him. It is necessary to consider another interpretation of the Gospels. An attempt has been made to present the Sermon on the Mount as a practical guide for life, taking its precepts literally at face value and ignoring the spiritual interpretation to which he was not conscious, and excluding the plan of the Spirit in which he did not believe. By rejecting the entire Bible, except the 4 Gospels, and rejecting all miracles, he made a heroic but futile attempt to combine Christianity and materialism, and of course, he failed. His true place in history is not that of the founder of a new religious movement, but that of the man whose practical anarchism, proclaimed with all the fire of genius, paved the way for the Bolshevik Revolution, just as Rousseau had paved the way for the French Revolution. The spiritual key unlocks the mystery of biblical teaching in general, and the Gospels in particular. It explains miracles, showing they were performed to demonstrate that we too can perform miracles and thus overcome sin, illness, and limitation. Through this key we can afford to highlight verbal inspiration and all superstitious literalism, while understanding that the Bible is truly humanity's most precious and authentic possession. From an external perspective, the Bible is a collection of inspired documents written by men of all kinds in all sorts of circumstances over hundreds of years. These documents, as we have them, are rarely original, as they are redactions and compilations of older fragments, and the true authors' names are seldom known with certainty. However, this does not affect the spiritual purpose of the Bible in any way. Indeed, the book as it stands is an endless source of spiritual truth compiled under divine inspiration, and the true path by which it arrived in its current form. Regardless of the authorship of a particular chapter, it matters no more than the name of its scribe if it had one. The author is divine wisdom, and that is all that concerns us. What is called higher criticism pertains solely to the external. By completely losing the spiritual content of the scriptures, and from a spiritual standpoint, history is unimportant. Biography, lyric, and other poetic forms are different means by which the spiritual message is conveyed in the Bible. Parable is used to convey spiritual and metaphysical truth. Many things that were never intended to be more than a parable were taken at the time as a literal statement of facts, often giving the impression that the Bible teaches things contrary to common sense. An example is the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. If correctly understood, perhaps it is the most wonderful parable of all. Its author never claimed it to be considered a story, but those with a literal mindset took it as such, with all sorts of absurd consequences. The spiritual key to the Bible saves us from all these difficulties, dilemmas, and apparent inconsistencies. It saves us from false positions of ritual, evangelism, and what is called liberalism, for it gives us the truth. This truth turns out to be nothing less than the astonishing but undeniable fact that the outer world, whether the physical body or the common things of life, winds, rain, clouds, the earth itself, responds to man's thought and is subject to his control when man knows it. The outer world, far from being the prison of circumstances it is commonly supposed to be, actually has no inherent character, good or bad. It simply has the character we consciously or unconsciously attribute to it. Day by day, every thought occupying your mind, your secret place, as Jesus called it, shapes your destiny for better or worse. In fact, our entire life experience is nothing more than the outward expression of inner thought. We can choose the type of thoughts we entertain. Breaking a bad thought habit may be somewhat difficult, but it can be done. In fact, we are always choosing, and therefore our lives are the result of the kind of thoughts we have chosen to have, and thus they are of our own making. Therefore, there is perfect justice in the universe, no punishment for another man's original sin, but simply the harvest of what we have sown. We have free will, but our free will lies in our choice of thought. This is essentially what Jesus taught. This, as we shall see, is the underlying message of the entire Bible, but it is not expressed with the same clarity throughout the book. At the beginning of the book, it shines faintly like the light of a very dim lamp, but over time, one veil after another is removed, and the light shines brighter and brighter, until in the teaching of Jesus Christ, it bursts forth clearly and unrestrictedly. On this plane, what we must deal with is man's understanding of truth, and throughout history, this understanding has constantly and continuously been perfected. Indeed, what we call progress is nothing more than the outer expression corresponding to the idea of God that humanity is continually improving. Jesus Christ summed up this truth. He taught it fully and meticulously, and above all, he demonstrated it in his own person. Today, most of us can intellectually conceive the idea of what this must mean in its entirety, and much more it must inevitably follow from a competent understanding of it. With all this, what we can prove is quite a different matter. Acceptance of truth is the great first step, but we will not have crossed this step until we have demonstrated it in practice. Jesus demonstrated everything he taught, including the transcendence of death, which we call resurrection. For reasons I cannot discuss here, whenever a difficulty is overcome by prayer, it helps the entire human race, past, present, and future, in general, and helps to overcome that particular kind of difficulty. By overcoming all kinds of limitations to which humanity is subject, and especially by triumphing over death. Jesus accomplished a work of unique and inestimable value for the human race, which is why he is rightly called the Savior of the world. When he deemed it appropriate to summarize all that he had accomplished during a series of likely multi-day conferences, where he probably spoke 2 or 3 times a day, he seized this opportunity to summarize the message, to clarify the points, so to speak. Naturally, some of those present took notes, and later, these notes were edited into what we know as the Sermon on the Mount. The authors of the 4 Gospels each selected material for their monographs according to their own intention. Matthew gives us the most comprehensive and carefully ordered version of the discourse. The Sermon on the Mount is an almost perfect codification of the religion of Jesus Christ, which is why I chose it as the text for this book. It is practical and personal, definitive, specific, yet broadly enlightening. Once the true meaning of the instructions is understood, simply beginning to faithfully put them into practice yields immediate results. The degree and extent of these results will depend solely on the sincerity and thoroughness with which they are applied. This is a matter each individual must resolve for themselves. No one can save another's soul or pay their debt. One can and should help others in particular circumstances, but in the long term each must learn to do their own work and cease from sinning, lest something worse happen to them. If you truly want to change your life, to become a completely different person in the eyes of God and humanity, if you truly desire health, mental peace, and spiritual development, then Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, has clearly shown you how to achieve these things. But it is not an easy task, and although we know it can be done because some have done it, there is a price to pay. This price is the actual application of these principles in every aspect of your life, as well as in every daily transaction, whether you want to or not, especially where you would prefer not to. If you are willing to pay this price, to truly break with the old self and begin to create the new, then the study of the great sermon will be for you, the mountain of liberation. Chapter 2. The Beatitudes. Seeing the crowds, he went up on a mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Matthew chapter 5. The Sermon on the Mount begins with the 8 Beatitudes. This is, of course, one of the most well-known sections of the Bible. Even those whose knowledge of Scripture is limited to a handful of well-known chapters certainly know the Beatitudes. Unfortunately, they almost never understand them, and generally consider them as advice for perfection without real application to daily life. However, this is simply because they lack the spiritual key. In reality, the Beatitudes constitute a prose poem of 8 verses, complete in itself, which practically summarizes the entirety of Christian teaching. It is a spiritual summary, rather than a literal one, summarizing the spirit of the teaching rather than the letter. Such a general summary is highly characteristic of the ancient Eastern approach to religious and philosophical teaching. Naturally, it echoes the Noble Eightfold Path of Buddhism, the 10 Commandments of Moses, and other compact groupings of ideas. Jesus exclusively devoted himself to teaching general principles, and these principles always related to mental states. He knew that if someone's mental states are correct, everything else must also be, whereas if they are incorrect, nothing else can be. Unlike great religious teachers, he does not give us detailed instructions on what we should or should not do. He does not tell us to abstain from eating or drinking certain things, nor to practice various religious rites at specific times and occasions. In fact, his entire teaching is anti-ritualistic, anti-formalistic. At no point did he show sympathy towards the Jewish priesthood and its theory of salvation through the fulfillment of certain rules. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. John 4:23-24. The Pharisees, with their stringent code of detailed rules, were the only people towards whom he was truly intolerant. Every conscientious Pharisee of the time, and most of them were in their own view, had to adhere to a vast number of external details every day before they could feel they had met God's requirements. However, Jesus' policy contrasts with this, because his goal is rather to strip the heart of any reliance on external things, both for pleasant glorification and for spiritual salvation, and to encourage a new mental attitude. And this policy is clearly set forth in the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Here we must consider a point of great practical importance in the study of the Bible, namely that terms, expressions, and sometimes the words themselves are used in the Bible in a clearly different sense than in everyday usage. In reality, the Bible is a manual of metaphysics, a guide for the growth of the soul, and it considers all matters from this angle. It cannot be emphasized too strongly. Hence, it adopts the broadest view of all subjects and considers all things in their relationship to the human soul. It uses many common terms in a much broader sense than their everyday usage. For example, the word bread in the Bible does not simply mean any kind of physical food, as it is generally interpreted in literature, but it encompasses all the things that man needs. All material goods, like clothing, housing, money, education, companionship, etc. And above all, it represents spiritual things such as spiritual perception, spiritual understanding, and preeminently spiritual achievement. Give us this day our daily bread. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Another example is the word prosperity in the biblical sense, where godliness and prosper mean much more than the acquisition of material goods. In reality, they mean success in prayer. Success in prayer is, from the standpoint of the soul, the only kind of prosperity worth pursuing. Furthermore, if our prayers are successful, we will naturally obtain everything we need in material terms. However, material wealth is truly the least important thing in life, and this is what the Bible suggests by giving the word prosper its true meaning. To be poor in spirit does not mean at all what we today call poor in spirit. Poverty of spirit means to have stripped oneself of all desire to do one's own personal will, and equally importantly, to have renounced all preconceived opinions in sincere pursuit of God. It means being willing to give up your current way of thinking, your current viewpoints and prejudices, your current lifestyle if necessary. Indeed, to abandon anything that might stand in the way of finding God. One of the most poignant passages in all literature is the story of the young rich man who missed a great opportunity to be happy and found himself only with great possessions. In reality, this is the story of humanity as a whole. We reject the salvation that Jesus offers us, our opportunity to find God, because we have great possessions, not because we are rich in terms of money, as most people are not, but because we have great possessions in the form of preconceived ideas, confidence in our own judgment, and ideas to which we are accustomed. This includes spiritual pride arising from distinction, sentimental or material attachment to institutions and organizations, habits of life from which we do not want to part, concern for the respect of others, or perhaps fear of public ridicule. In short, an interest in worldly honor and distinction. These possessions keep us chained to the rock of suffering, which is our exile from God. The young rich man is one of the most tragic figures in history, not because he was rich, for wealth itself is neither good nor bad, but because his heart was enslaved to the love of money, which Paul tells us is the root of all evils. He could have been a billionaire in gold and silver, and as long as his heart was not engaged in it, he would have been as free as the poorest beggar to enter the kingdom of heaven. However, his trust was placed in his riches, which closed the door to him. The message of Christ was not enthusiastically received by the ecclesiastics of Jerusalem because they had great possessions, possessions of rabbinical knowledge, possessions of honor and public importance, positions of authority as official masters of religion. These possessions should have been sacrificed to accept spiritual teaching. The humble and uneducated who listened to the Master with pleasure were happy not to have such possessions that kept them away from the truth. Today, when the simple message of Christ about the immanence and availability of God and the eternal inner light burning in man's soul reappeared in the world, it was again well received, mostly only among the simple and uneducated. It was not bishops, deans, ministers, and Presbyterians who made it known to the world. It was not Oxford, Cambridge, or Harvard that became the great center for spreading this vital knowledge. The answer, once again, is that they had great possessions of intellectual and spiritual pride, great possessions of complacency and personal security, great possessions of academic commitment and social prestige. On the other hand, the poor in spirit suffer from none of these shames, either because they never had them or because they have surpassed them in the tide of spiritual understanding. They are no longer intimidated by human authority, no matter how august. They are no longer certain of their own opinions. They have realized that their dearest beliefs may have been, and probably were, mistaken, and that all their ideas and views on life may be wrong and require complete reshaping. They are ready to start over and relearn life. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Grief, sorrow are not intrinsically good, for God's will is that all should know happiness and joyful success. Jesus said, "I have come that they may have life, and have it abundantly." However, often problems and suffering are extremely useful because many people do not bother to learn the truth until they are pushed by pain and failure. Then pain becomes relatively good. Sooner or later, every human being will have to discover the truth about God and come into direct contact with Him. We must know the truth that will free us once and for all from our three-dimensional limitations and their consequences, disease and death. But most people will not seek God with all their heart unless pushed by some kind of problem. In reality, it is not necessary for man to have problems, for if he seeks God first, problems never need to occur. He can always choose to learn through spiritual development or learn through painful experience, and it will be his fault if he chooses the latter option. Generally, it is only when health is shaken and ordinary medical means have failed to relieve it that people seriously begin to acquire this spiritual understanding of the body as the true incarnation of divine life, which is our only guarantee to overcome illness. But if people turn to God and gain some of this understanding while their health is still good, they would never have to be sick again. Generally, it is only when people keenly feel the pangs of poverty, that is, when ordinary material sources are exhausted, that they turn to God as a last resort and learn the lesson that divine power is truly the source of provision for man, and all material agents are mere channels. But this lesson must be learned and realized deeply before man can move on to a higher or broader experience than the current one. There are many mansions in our Father's house, but the key to accessing higher mansions is always the acquisition of absolute dominion over the one where we are. Therefore, it is a great blessing that we are forced to straighten out the issue of provisioning Him as soon as possible. Prosperous individuals who recognize God as their true source and regularly pray for deeper spiritual understanding on this point will never suffer from poverty or financial problems. However, they must ensure to wisely use their current resources, not selfishly amassing wealth, but knowing that God is the owner and they are merely stewards or trustees. Managing money entails a responsibility that cannot be evaded. You must handle it wisely or face the consequences. This general premise has been embedded in each of our difficulties, not only in physical or financial problems, but in all other ills inherited by the flesh. Family difficulties, disputes and distances, sin and remorse and everything else. They need not occur at all if we seek first the kingdom of God and right understanding. If not, they must come, and for us, this morning will be a disguised blessing, because through it we will be comforted. And when the Bible speaks of consolation, it refers to the experience of God's presence, which is the end of all mourning. Orthodox churches have all too often taught of a crucified Christ who ends on the cross, but the Bible presents to us the risen and triumphant Christ. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. On the surface, this beatitude seems to have very little sense and even seems to contradict the facts of daily life. Any sensible person observing the world or studying history could sincerely accept this word at face value, and even most Christians have neglected it in practice, with a regrettable sense that it should certainly be so, but that it is certainly not the case in reality. However, this attitude is not sufficient. Sooner or later, the soul reaches a point where evasions and sophisms must be abandoned once and for all to face the reality of life, whatever the cost. So either Jesus meant what he said or he did not. Either he knew what he was talking about or he did not. If this statement is not taken seriously, we will be led to the position that every Christian must accept. Either Jesus said what he did not truly believe, as unscrupulous persons do. We must confront this situation from the beginning of our study of this Sermon on the Mount. We have two options: take Jesus seriously, or not take him seriously. In this case, we should set aside his teachings and cease to call ourselves Christian, defend his name verbally, say that Christianity is divinely inspired truth, while avoiding in practice all decisive implications of his teaching. This is hypocrisy and the most fatal weakness. Either Jesus is a reliable guide, or he is not. If he is to be trusted, then let us assume he meant what he said, and was most informed on the art of living through difficulties and pain that humanity endures. They are truly due to the fact that our way of life is so opposed to the truth that the things he taught and the words he spoke seem senseless and absurd at first glance. In reality, when Jesus' teachings are correctly understood, not only are they true, but they are extremely practicable. Indeed, they are the most practicable of all doctrines. Thus we discover he was not a sentimental dreamer or a mere purveyor of commonplaces, but an unwavering realist who can only be a great mystic. This text summarizes the essence of his teaching regarding its practical application. This beatitude is among the 6 most important verses in the Bible. When you possess the spiritual meaning of this text, you will have the secret of dominion, the secret to overcoming any kind of difficulty. It is literally the key to life. It is the message of Jesus Christ. He condensed this proverb into a single sentence. This non-proverb is actually the philosopher's stone of alchemists that transforms the base metal of limitation and problems into the gold of comfort, health, and harmony. We can realize there are 2 polar words in the text, meek and earth, both used in a special and highly technical sense, and it is necessary to demystify them before finding the wonderful meaning underlying them. First, the word earth in the Bible does not simply mean this globe, it means manifestation. Manifestation, or expression, is the result of a cause. Before we can know anything about a cause, it must express or manifest itself. And conversely, any expression or manifestation must have a cause. You learn in divine metaphysics, and particularly in the Sermon on the Mount, that every condition is mental, and your body, your affairs, your home, your business, your entire experience are only the manifestation of your own mental states. It doesn't matter if you are totally unaware of most of your mental states, because they are there, even if you have now forgotten them or were never conscious of them. In other words, your earth means your entire external experience, and inherit the earth means having dominion over this external experience, that is, having the power to harmonize your life conditions to achieve true success. All the earth will be filled with the glory of the Lord, your soul will dwell in peace, and your descendants will inherit the earth. May the Lord reign, and the earth rejoice. Thus, we see that when the Bible speaks of possessing the earth, ruling over the earth, making the earth glorious, etc., it refers to the conditions of our lives, from our physical health to the farthest reaches of our affairs. So, this text undertakes to tell us how we can possess or govern our own lives and destinies. Let's now examine how the beatitude must be accomplished. It says that power, meaning control over the conditions of our lives, must be obtained in a specific and most unexpected way of all, nothing more and nothing less than through meekness. However, the fact is that this word meekness is also used in a special and technical sense. Its true meaning has nothing to do with the sense it currently holds in modern Spanish. In fact, there are few qualities of human nature more unattractive than those that are now designated by the word meekness. For the modern reader, meekness suggests a creature of mean spirit, lacking in courage and self-esteem, as useless to itself as it is to others, crawling on the ground like a worm, and probably hypocritical. It recalls Dickens' repulsive Uriah Heep at its worst, as well as some of the author's vilest characters. However, Dickens always has these characters to warn or ridicule, never to be emulated. For the modern reader with these connotations of the word in mind, here is the Sermon on the Mount, which rejects these teachings because it tells him at its threshold that domination is for the meek, and this doctrine cannot be accepted. The true meaning of the word meek in the Bible is a mental attitude that combines faith in God and the understanding that God's will towards us is something joyful, vital, and far better than anything we might wish for ourselves. This mindset also includes a perfect disposition to allow God's will to manifest in the way that divine wisdom considers best, rather than in a particular way that we might have chosen for ourselves. This complex mental attitude in its analysis, but simple in itself, is the key to dominion or success in demonstration. There is no word for this in common language because such a thing does not exist, except for those who are on the spiritual basis of the teachings of Jesus Christ. But if we want to inherit the earth, we must absolutely acquire this meekness. Moses, who knew extraordinary success in prayer, exceeded the limits of belief in the manifestation of the physical body of a young man in the prime of life when he was 120 years old according to the calendar, and then transcended matter by materializing without dying. He was especially known for this quality of meekness, just like Moses. In addition to his own personal demonstration, he performed a wonderful work for his entire nation, liberating them from Egyptian slavery in the face of incredible difficulties. The success of the Exodus was Moses' demonstration and that of a few advanced souls who assisted him, influencing the entire subsequent course of history through his teaching and actions. Moses had an open mind, ready to learn new things and new ways of thinking and working. He did not reject the new revelation because it was new and revolutionary, as most of his self-satisfied colleagues in the Egyptian hierarchy did, at least initially. He was not free from serious character flaws, but he was great enough not to fall prey to intellectual or spiritual pride, and therefore he gradually rose above these flaws as the new truth worked in his soul. Moses perfectly understood that strict adherence to God's will, far from implying the loss of all good, could only mean that life would be more refined and better. Thus he did not regard it as a sacrifice of self, because he knew it was the highest form of self-glorification in the true sense of the word. Selfish self-glorification is the petty vanity that eventually leads to humiliation, while true self-glorification, which is truly glorious, is the glorification of God. The Father in me, he doeth the works, me in you, and you in me. Moses had a wonderful understanding of the power of spoken word to call forth good, which is scientific faith. He was one of the gentlest men who ever lived, and no one, except our Savior, has inherited the earth to a higher degree. There is a wonderful Eastern saying that goes, "Gentleness compels even God himself." Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Justice is another of the great words in the Bible, one of those keys that the reader must possess in order to understand this book, along with earth, meek, and consolation. Justice is a technical term used in a special and defined sense in the Bible. It means not only right behavior, but also right thinking in all areas of life. If we study the Sermon on the Mount, we will find that each clause reiterates the great truth that external things are nothing more than the expression, pressure, or representation of our inner thoughts and beliefs. We have control or power over our thoughts to think as we want, and in this way, we indirectly make or spoil our lives by our way of thinking. Jesus will repeatedly tell us in these speeches that we have no direct power over external things, as these are only consequences or images resulting from what happens in secret. If we could directly affect external things without changing our thoughts, it would mean that we could think one thing and produce another, and this would be contrary to the law of the universe. In reality, this same notion is the fundamental false idea at the root of all human problems, all diseases and sins, all struggles and poverty, and even death itself. On the other hand, the great law of the universe is precisely this. What you think in your mind, you will produce in your experience. As within, so without. You cannot think one thing and produce another. If you want to control your circumstances to achieve harmony and happiness, you must first control your thoughts to achieve harmony and happiness, and then external things will follow. If you want health, you must first think health, and remember, thinking about health does not just mean thinking about a healthy body, as important as that is. It also includes thinking about peace, satisfaction, and benevolence towards all, because, as we will see later, destructive emotion is one of the main causes of disease. If you want to grow spiritually and increase in knowledge of God, you must have spiritual thoughts, thoughts of God, and focus your attention, which is your life, on these rather than on limitations. If you want material prosperity, you must first think thoughts of prosperity until it becomes a habit. Because what keeps most people in poverty is simply the habit of thinking about poverty. If you want good company, if you want to be loved, you must first have thoughts of love and benevolence. Good begets good. It is another way of announcing the great law. As a man sows in his invisible thoughts, so shall he reap in what is seen. All things work together for good for those who love good. And loving good means cultivating thoughts of good. When people become aware of these great truths, they naturally begin to apply them in their own lives, finally realizing the vital importance of righteousness or harmonious thought. Just as sensible people, they immediately begin to try to put their house in order. The principle in question is perfectly simple, but unfortunately, its achievement is less easy because it must be so. The answer lies in the extraordinary power of habit, and habits of thought are both the most subtle and the most difficult to break. Comparatively, it is easy to break a physical habit if one truly desires it, because action on the physical plane is much slower and more tangible than on the mental plane. However, in dealing with habits of thought, we cannot, so to speak, lag behind and take a comparative view. How could we do this, considering our actions? Thought flows through the theater of consciousness in a continuous stream so swiftly that only constant vigilance can manage it. Once again, the theater of our actions is the stage of our immediate presence. I can only act where I am present. I can give orders by letter or by phone, or press a button and get results from a distance. But again, my action occurs where I am and at the present moment. In contrast with thought, I can embrace the entire domain of my life, even all the people with whom I have been or am connected in any way. I can travel into the past or the future with the same ease. Thus we see that the task of achieving harmonious thought in all aspects, or true righteousness, is much greater than it initially seems. For this reason, many people become discouraged and attribute the fact that they have not changed their way of thinking sooner, thereby destroying the old Adam, as Paul says. Naturally, this is a capital mistake and, incidentally, self-condemnation, given that it is essentially negative thinking. And so injustice tends to breed even more problems in this old vicious circle. If you are not progressing as quickly as you wish, the remedy is to pay even more attention to retaining only harmonious thoughts. Do not dwell on your mistakes or the slowness of your progress, but claim the presence of God with you, especially when this discouraging suggestion looms. Claim wisdom, claim power or prosperity in prayer. Take a good mental inventory or review of your life, and make sure that you no longer harbor negative thoughts somewhere in your mind. Is there a wrong line of conduct that you still follow? Is there someone you still have not forgiven? Are you harboring some form of political, racial, or religious hatred? Undoubtedly, this disguises itself under a cloak of self-justification. If so, strip away this layer and rid yourself of this malignant thing, for it is poison to you. Is there jealousy in your heart? Perhaps personal or professional, it is something odious and far more common than is admitted in educated society. If it is there, eliminate it at all costs. Is there sentimental remorse? If so, reflect as an immortal being, a child of God who possesses spiritual power. No good thing is beyond your reach here and now. Waste no more time lamenting over what is past and done, but make the present and future a brilliant realization of the desire of your heart. Are there regrets for past mistakes? Remember that remorse, unlike repentance, is nothing more than a form of spiritual pride. To relish it, as some people do, is a betrayal of God's love and forgiveness, which says, "Behold, now is the day of salvation, behold, I make all things new." In this beatitude, Jesus tells us not to be discouraged if we do not overcome everything at once, if our progress seems slow. However, if we are not progressing at all, we cannot pray properly and must find out why by examining our lives and praying for wisdom and guidance. In fact, we should constantly pray for wisdom, guidance, and for the living action of the Holy Spirit upon us, so that the quality of our prayers and our prosperity constantly increase. But if we are making progress, if things are improving even if not very quickly, we must not be discouraged. We must simply continue to work with perseverance. And whenever we are truly sincere in our efforts, that is, when we genuinely thirst for righteousness, then in the end we will certainly be satisfied. It is impossible that a sincere quest for truth and justice, if persevering, should not be crowned with success. God does not mock, much less his children. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. This is a brief summary of the law of life that Jesus develops more deeply later in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7, verses 1 to 5. In itself, this beatitude does not require much commentary, as the words used have the ordinary sense that we still give them in daily life. The statement is as clear and obvious in its meaning as the law in question is simple and unyielding in its action. The question that the Christian Scientist must keep in mind is that, as always, the vital importance of the principle addressed in this beatitude lies in its application to the realm of thought. What truly matters is to have mercy in your thought. Benevolent actions associated with unkind thoughts are hypocrisy dictated by fear or desire for personal glory, or for a similar reason. These are imitations and bless neither the giver nor the receiver. In contrast, true thought towards one's neighbor spiritually, mentally, and materially blesses them and blesses you as well. Let us have compassion in our mental judgments towards our brother, because in truth, we are all one. And the deeper he seems to wander, the more urgent is the need to help him with right thought and thereby facilitate his release. Do you understand the power of the spiritual idea of Christ's truth? You have a responsibility that others do not have. Do not seek to avoid it, for we are all one, all a part of God's living garment. You will ultimately receive the same treatment that you accord others. You will receive the same merciful help in your own hours of need from those who are further along the path than you. But above all, it is true that releasing others from the burden of your condemnation allows the absolution of your own condemnation. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. This is one of those wonderful sayings with which the Bible is so rich. In a few words, it summarizes the entire philosophy of religion. As usual in the Scriptures, the words are used in a technical sense and encompass a much larger meaning than we give them in everyday life. Let's start with the basis of the promise of this beatitude, which is nothing less than seeing God. Of course, we know that God has no physical form, and therefore it is not about seeing him in the ordinary physical sense, as one might see a human being or an object. If one could see God in this manner, he would be limited, and thus would not be God. Seeing, as we understand it here, means spiritual perception, and spiritual perception is precisely the ability to understand the true nature of being, which we all lack. We dwell in God's world, but do not know it at all as it is. Heaven surrounds us. It is not a distant place in the skies. It is around us. But because we lack spiritual perception, we cannot recognize it, that is, we cannot experience it. Therefore, For us, we can say that we are excluded from heaven. In reality, we come into contact with a tiny fragment of it, and even this tiny fragment, we call it the universe. But even this small piece, we mostly see it all twisted. Heaven is the religious name for the presence of God, and heaven is infinite. But our mental habit leads us to shape our experience in only 3 dimensions. Heaven is eternity, and what we know here, we know it only serially, in a sequence called time, which never allows us to understand an experience in its totality. God is divine spirit, and in this spirit, there is absolutely no limitation or restriction. However, we see everything distributed in what is called space, an artificial restriction that continually inhibits the constant rearrangement of our experience that our creative thought requires. Heaven is the realm of spirit, of ageless substance without discordance or decay, a realm of eternal good. Yet, to our distorted vision, everything ages, everything falls into ruin, everything is born only to die, everything blooms only to fade. It's as if a colorblind person were in a beautiful flower garden. Around him are glorious colors, but he ignores them and sees only black, white, and gray. And suppose also that he is devoid of the sense of smell, we will see that a very small part of the glory of the garden exists for him. Yet everything is there, if only he could perceive it. This limitation in us is known in theology as the fall of man, and it results from our use of free will in opposition to the will of God. God created man upright, but man sought to distort himself. Our task is to overcome these distortions as quickly as possible until we reach the point where we can know things as they really are, experience heaven as it really is. This is the meaning of seeing God and seeing Him face to face. Seeing God is learning the truth as it really is, and it is infinite freedom and perfect beatitude. Through this wonderful beatitude, we are precisely shown how this supreme task must be accomplished and who will accomplish it. It is the pure in heart. Again, it must be understood that here, the words pure and purity must be taken in a much broader sense than is commonly attributed to them. Purity in the Bible implies much more than physical purity, that is, vital and important thought in its complete sense. Purity consists of recognizing only God as the sole real cause, the sole real power in existence. In another part of the sermon, it is called the soul folly, and it is the keystone of life. It is nothing else than the secret to escape all disease, problem, and limitation. In summary, the fall of man, and thus our text might well be paraphrased as something like this: Blessed are those who recognize God as the only real cause, the only real presence, and the only real power. Not in a theoretical or formal manner, but practically and specifically in all their thoughts and actions, and not only in certain parts of their lives, but in every corner of it, leaving nothing aside, but fulfilling His will down to the smallest detail, surpassing all limitations of time, space, and matter. From time to time, it is good for everyone to paraphrase in their own language the most well-known passages of Scripture, as this will help clarify in their mind the exact meaning the text gives them. Sometimes it will help draw attention to important meanings that had gone unnoticed until now. Notice that Jesus speaks of pure hearts. The word heart in the Bible often means that part of the human mentality which modern psychology knows as the subconscious. This is extremely important because it is not enough to accept truth only with the conscious mind. At this stage, it remains a mere opinion. It is only when it is accepted by the subconscious mind and fully assimilated that it can make a difference in a person's character or life. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. This is a practical lesson of inestimable value on the art of prayer, which is the only means of renewing communion with God. To the casual observer, this beatitude might seem to be a simple conventional religious generality, or even a sententious cliché of the type often used by those seeking to be edifying without having much to say. In reality, prayer is the only real action in the full sense of the term, for it alone changes character. A modification of character or a change of soul is a real change. When this kind of change occurs, you become a different person, and therefore, for the rest of your life, You act differently from the way you would have acted before and would have continued to act if you had not prayed. In other words, you become a different man. The degree of difference can be very slight each time you pray, but it is there, for you cannot pray without becoming different to some degree. If you could have a clear understanding of the presence of God with you, it would make a very great and dramatic change in your character, so that in a twinkling of an eye your outlook, your habits, your entire life, in fact, would change completely in every way. Many cases of this kind are recorded both in the East and in the West. Authentic cases of what was once called conversions are examples in this sense because the change caused by prayer is radical. Jesus refers to this as being born again, which makes you different as if you were born again. The word prayer should be understood as any form of communion or attempt at communion with God, whether vocal or purely mental. It includes both affirmative prayer and invocation, each good in its own realm, from meditation to the highest form of prayer, contemplation. In the absence of prayer, the only thing you can do is express the character that you have in all the circumstances in which you find yourself. Thus, most of your friends would be ready to predict in advance how you would behave in different kinds of crises that might arise. The great requirement for success is to first achieve a certain degree of true mental peace. This true inner peace of the soul was known to mystics as serenity, and they continually tell us that serenity is the great passport to the presence of God. The smooth sea like crystal surrounding the great white throne means that serenity is the basic state of tranquility of the soul to which Jesus refers with the word peace, and the peace that surpasses all human understanding. Those who make the peace of which mention is made in this beatitude are those who manifest it in their own souls, for they are the ones who overcome limitation and become truly and not just potentially children of God. This mental condition is the goal that Jesus aims for in all the instructions he gives us in the Sermon on the Mount and elsewhere. I give you my peace, I give you my peace, I do not give you as the world gives. Let your heart not be troubled, neither let it be afraid. As long as there is fear, resentment, or any other problem in your heart, that is, as long as you lack serenity or peace, it is impossible to achieve much. A certain degree of serenity is essential to achieve true concentration. Of course, being a peacemaker in the usual sense of resolving others' disputes is excellent, but as any practical person knows, it is an exceedingly difficult role to play. Interfering in others' disputes often makes it easier to worsen things rather than to improve them. It is highly likely that personal opinions will interfere with your efforts, and these opinions are very likely to be mistaken. If you succeed in getting both parties involved to adopt a new perspective on the controversial issue, that is certainly a good thing. However, if you settle for a compromise where they agree only for reasons of personal interest or due to some form of coercion, then the problem has only been superficially repaired, and there is no true peace because neither party is satisfied or forgiven. When you understand the power of prayer, you can truly resolve many conflicts authentically, probably without speaking at all. The silent idea of the all-powerful influence of love and wisdom will almost imperceptibly dissolve any problem. Thus, any agreement that is beneficial for all parties will occur under the influence of the silently spoken word. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Considering what we know about the essential nature of Jesus' teachings, namely that God's will for us is harmony, peace, and joy, and that all this must be achieved by cultivating right thoughts, or righteousness, this is a very surprising statement. Jesus tells us time and time again that our Father delights in giving us the kingdom, and that the way we must receive it is by cultivating serenity or peace of soul. He asserts that peacemakers who do this by praying with gentleness will prosper, inherit the earth, turn their mourning into joy, and that whatever they ask the Father according to this teaching, he will do it. But it is said here that it is blessed to be persecuted because of our good judgment or righteousness, because it is through this means that we triumph, which is a reason to rejoice and be happy to be reviled and accused, and that even the prophets and the great have also endured these things. All of this is certainly very surprising and perfectly correct, except that we must understand that the source of all this persecution is none other than ourselves. There is no external persecutor, only our own lower self. When we encounter difficulties with righteousness or right thinking, when we are strongly tempted to have false thoughts about a situation, a person, or ourselves, to give in to fear, anger, or discouragement, then we are persecuted because of our righteousness, and for us it is an extremely fortunate or blessed condition, because it is in these moments that we truly progress. Every spiritual treatment or scientific prayer involves a struggle with our own lower self that wants to satisfy the old habit of thought. It pursues us and insults us. If we want to put it dramatically in the Eastern way, the great prophets and enlightened ones of the race who eventually triumphed did so precisely through these struggles with themselves when they were persecuted by their own lower natures or the old Adam. Jesus himself, tempted in every way as we are, had to face this persecution more than once, notably in the Garden of Gethsemane, and for a moment even on the cross. Well, as these struggles with our lower self must take place sooner or later, the sooner they end, the better, and that is why they are relatively great blessings. Note well that there is no virtue or advantage in being persecuted or bothered by others. Nothing can happen to our experience unless it finds something in us with which it resonates. Thus, having problems and difficulties is simply a sign that our own mentality needs clarity, because what you see at any moment is only your own concept. At this stage, there is a serious danger for weak, vain, or self-justified individuals, because when others do not treat them as they would like to be treated, or do not give them the consideration they believe they deserve, they often tend to assert that they are persecuted due to their spiritual superiority and adopt an absurd attitude because of it. This is a pathetic fallacy. As a consequence of the great law of life, which the entire Sermon on the Mount expounds upon, we can only receive what is rightfully ours at any given moment, and no one can prevent us from doing so. Therefore, all persecution and obstacles absolutely originate from within. Nevertheless, sentimental tradition attaches us to it. There is no virtue in martyrdom. If one had sufficient understanding of the truth, it would not be necessary to go through such an experience. Jesus was not a martyr. He could have saved himself at any time if he had wanted to avoid crucifixion. It was necessary for someone to triumph over death by truly dying, but he deliberately chose to perform a specific work for us in his own way, and was not martyred in any case. We must not in any way disdain the splendid value, devotion, and heroic self-sacrifice of martyrs from all ages, but we must recognize that their understanding was incomplete, otherwise they would not have been martyred. If one fixates on martyrdom and considers it, as many have done, the greatest good, you will understand that whatever you focus on, you attract to yourself. Although we may envy the moral and spiritual heights they reached, we know that if martyrs had truly loved their enemies, as we say loved in the scientific sense of knowing the truth about them, the Roman persecutors, and even Nero himself, would have opened the prison doors to them, and Inquisition zealots would have reconsidered their cause. Chapter 3. As a man thinks, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything, except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew 5. In this magnificent passage, Jesus speaks to those who have become aware of material bondage and have gained some spiritual understanding of the nature of being. In other words, he addresses those who understand the meaning of the totality of God, or good, and the powerlessness of evil in the face of truth. To such individuals, he describes them as the salt of the earth and the light of the world, which is not an exaggeration for those who understand truth and genuinely live in accordance with it. We can, and it is indeed quite easy, accept these vital principles as true, but not consistently apply them in our own lives. This is a dangerous attitude, for in this case the salt has lost its flavor, and is only fit to be thrown out and trampled upon. If you understand and accept the teachings of Jesus and strive to practice them in every aspect of your daily life, if you systematically seek to destroy everything within you, such as selfishness, pride, vanity, sensuality, egocentrism, jealousy, self-pity, condemnation, etc., by pushing them away rather than yielding to them, then you are worthy to be called the salt of the earth. If you truly live this life, then regardless of your current circumstances or the difficulties you may face, you will triumph over all these trials. You will, in a very positive and literal sense, be a healing and enlightening influence to all those around you, and a blessing to all humanity. You will be a blessing to men and women in distant places and times. People whom you have never heard of will hear of you, a light in the world. Whatever the condition of your soul, it always expresses itself in your external circumstances and in the intangible influence you radiate. In general, there is a cosmic law that nothing can deny its own nature. Emerson said, "What you are shouts so loudly in my ears that I cannot hear what you say." In the Bible, the city always represents consciousness, and the hill or mountain always signifies prayer or spiritual activity. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? Or, unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain. The soul built upon prayer cannot be hidden. It shines brightly through the life it lives. It speaks for itself in complete silence. It does its best work unconsciously. Its mere presence heals and blesses all around, without any special effort. Never force others to accept spiritual truth. Instead, ensure they are so impressed by your own life and behavior, by the peace and joy radiating from you, that they come to you willingly, asking you to give them that wonderful thing you possess, the truth of Christ. If I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. This is making your soul the city on a hill that cannot be hidden, for it is the golden city, the city of God. It is letting your light shine to glorify your Father who is in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5. True Christianity is a wholly positive influence. It enters a man's life to broaden it, to enrich it, to make it more complete, never to restrict it. It is possible to lose something valuable in gaining a knowledge of truth. But this is only the sacrifice of things that make someone happier. It is never the sacrifice of what is really worth possessing. Many people have the idea that gaining a clearer understanding of God means giving up things they will regret. A young girl once said, "I plan to devote myself to religion later, when I am older. But first, I want to enjoy my life for a while." However, this is a lack of perspective. The elements to sacrifice are selfishness and the belief in any necessary limitation. Above all, the belief in any power or resistance of evil must be sacrificed, other than the power that we ourselves give it by believing in it. Approaching God would not have deprived this girl of any pleasure. On the contrary, she would have gained immensely in happiness. It is very true that, in changing her consciousness, certain forms of seeking pleasure would probably no longer attract her. That surely would have happened, but there would have been ample compensation in the new light shed on every aspect of her life, as well as in the new and wonderful aspects that the world would begin to assume for her. Only things that are not worth the effort to buy things that are truly worth having. If, on the other hand, someone was foolish enough to suppose that the knowledge of the truth of being able to place him above the moral law and permit its violation, he would discover quickly that he has made a tragic mistake. The more a person possesses of spiritual knowledge, the severer the punishment he inflicts for any violation of the moral law. The Christian cannot afford to be less attentive than others, to respect the entire moral code in every aspect of his life. On the contrary, he must be much more attentive than others. Indeed, any real spiritual understanding must necessarily be accompanied by a definitive moral improvement. It is possible that a theoretical acceptance of the letter of truth may be accompanied by moral recklessness, but it is absolutely impossible to undertake a true spiritual process without honestly striving to live life. It is totally impossible to dissociate true spiritual knowledge from correct behavior. A jot, or Greek note, means jot, which is the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The tilde, actually small horn in Spanish, is one of those small projections that distinguish one Hebrew letter from another. This means that we must not only respect the letter of the moral law, but also its smallest details. Not only must we embody common morality, but also the highest standards of honor. The scribes and Pharisees, despite their flaws, were mostly worthy men leading a strictly moral life according to their own convictions. Unfortunately, they possessed only the letter of the law, which they generally fully observed by rigorously performing their duty according to their understanding. Their flaws were the fatal weaknesses of religious formalism everywhere. The spiritual pride and holiness of these flaws were sublimely unconscious. It is the deadly malice of these affections of the soul, and they strove to fulfill the law as they understood it. Jesus knew this and gave them credit. He warns his disciples here that unless their practical conduct is in every aspect as good or better than that of these people, they need not assume they are progressing spiritually. Spiritual realization and the higher standards of behavior must go hand in hand. If one does not exist, neither does the other. As you grow in true spiritual power and understanding, you will find that many external rules and regulations become unnecessary. However, this happens because you have truly risen above them, never because you remained beneath them at this stage of your development, where your understanding of truth allows you to do without certain supports and external rules. Spiritual adulthood is reached when one has ceased to be spiritually minor. At that point, you will no longer need some external rules that seemed indispensable before, but your resulting life will be purer, truer, freer, and less selfish than before. That's the proof. To illustrate simply, some people find that at a certain stage of their progress, their mental processes become so orderly and clarified that with a little processing, they can handle their daily work, meet all their appointments, and fulfill all their duties without worrying about checking their watch. But sometimes one of their friends, knowing this and wanting to imitate them, simply skips the step of leaving their watch at home and ignoring it, resulting in being late for all their appointments, thereby disrupting their own workday and that of others, which they didn't bother to consider. If the student is spiritually prepared to do without their watch, they will find themselves doing the right thing at the right time without thinking about the watch at all. On the other hand, when they must make special arrangements to do without their watch and find themselves late for commitments, it's evidence that they are not yet ready to manifest in this aspect. What is appropriate for such a person in this case is to wear a watch, work on a schedule, and devote their treatments to things that truly matter, like self-healing and healing others, overcoming sin, working for understanding and wisdom, etc. The same applies to life's most important matters. This transition to spiritual adulthood cannot be rushed or forced, but must appear in its own time, when consciousness is ready, just as the blooming of a bulb can only result from natural growth. You must show where you are, keep that in front of your eyes, and write it on the posts of your heart. You must show where you are. Trying to show beyond your understanding is not spiritual. Spirituality is a matter of growth, and one who believes should not rush recklessly. Focus your attention on spiritual matters, and in the meantime, do everything that needs to be done in an ordinary way, without consciously trying to rush. You will be surprised to discover the pace at which your soul has quickened. Let's take a simple example. Suppose in a road accident, you find a man with a severed artery and blood flowing profusely. If the bleeding isn't stopped, the victim will die within minutes. What is the spiritual attitude to adopt in this case? Well, it's very simple. As soon as you perceive what has happened, you must turn the other cheek in the understanding of God's omnipresence. If you understand it well, as Jesus might, for example, the severed artery will heal immediately and there will be nothing else to do. It's highly unlikely that you have clear enough understanding for this, so showing where you are, you must follow the usual procedures to save the man's life, applying a tourniquet or any other appropriate procedure immediately. Take another example. Suppose a child falls into a canal as you pass by. Once again, the appropriate action would be to speak the word, and once again, if you have enough spiritual power, that child will immediately be safe. But if not, then showing where you are, you must strive to rescue them in any possible way, even plunging in yourself if necessary, and praying as you do so. Now, what about the man aware of considerable moral imperfection, perhaps a serious habit of grave sin, and who sincerely desires spiritual growth? He must give up the pursuit of spiritual knowledge until he has first reformed his conduct. Indeed, any effort to improve morally without spiritual growth is bound to fail. As Lincoln's phrase goes, a man cannot lift himself off the ground by pulling on his own boots, just as a sinner cannot reform through his own efforts. In such cases, relying on oneself will only result in repeated failure, ensuing discouragement, and likely, ultimately, despair of doing any good at all. The only path a person in this situation must follow is to pray regularly, especially in times of temptation, and to leave the responsibility for success in God's hands. They must keep trying, no matter how many times they fail. If they continue to pray, and particularly if they do so scientifically, very soon they will discover that the power of evil has been broken and they are free from that particular sin. To pray scientifically is to continually affirm that God is helping, that temptation has no power over them, and to constantly affirm that their true nature is spiritual and perfect. All this is far more potent than simply invoking God's help. Thus, moral regeneration and spiritual development will go hand in hand. Christian life does not demand that we possess perfect character, for if it did, who among us could live it? What it demands is an honest effort, not to attain that perfection, but to approach it. You have heard that it was said to the ancients, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment." But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment, and whoever says to his brother, "Rata, fool," will be liable to the Sanhedrin, and whoever says, "You fool," will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Matthew 5. Because it is a prior and inferior state of human consciousness, the old law necessarily dealt with external things. Indeed, man's apparent evolution goes from external to internal, while his fundamental spiritual growth goes from internal to external. Man begins by paying exclusive attention to external things, thinking to find both cause and effect there. As he progresses, he gradually realizes that external things are only the final product, the consequence of inner causes and events. When he has reached this stage, he has begun to seek God definitively. Thus, the old law was almost entirely concerned with external observances, and was satisfied if these were observed. It said, "You shall not kill," and if a man did not commit murder, he was considered to be obeying the law regardless of how much he desired to kill or how bitterly he hated his enemy. It said, "You shall not steal," and as long as he did not appropriate his neighbor's property, he was considered to be keeping the law regardless of his feelings about it. Jesus came to bring the human race to the next great step, the most important of all, which could in fact be the final step in overcoming all our limitations, if only we could clearly understand what this step implies and take it. The heart of the entire Sermon on the Mount, which is the essence of the Christian message itself, insists on the necessity of this same step. The understanding that external conformity, however essential it may be, is no longer sufficient in itself. If we want to attain spiritual adulthood, we must not only be content to superficially apply these rules, but also change the inner man. The old law said, "You shall not kill," while Jesus says that even harboring resentment or being angry with your brother is enough to keep you away from the kingdom of heaven, as was the case with clear prophets when primitive and barbarous peoples could be persuaded not to kill those who had offended them. Developing self-control needed to master their life. Spiritual demonstration requires overcoming one's own anger. It is not possible to have a valid spiritual experience or exercise considerable spiritual power on the path of healing until you have abandoned resentment and condemnation towards your brother. As long as you are not ready to get rid of such things, your prayers will have very little effect. It can be stated without fear of making mistakes that the more love there is, the more power there is. This is why people with a developed spiritual perception constantly strive to remain free from critical and condemning thoughts, indignation, resentment, the desire to punish others or to see them punished, the desire for revenge and feelings of envy. All these things form a barrier that is quite impermeable to spiritual power or progress. In the Eastern manner of dramatizing the issue, Jesus said that if you bring an offering to the altar and remember that your brother has something against you, you must leave your offering without trying to offer it, and go and make peace with your brother first. Then, once you have done that, your offering will be acceptable. As we all know, it is customary to bring various types of offerings to the temple, ranging from bulls and cows to doves and incense offerings, or more recently monetary offerings of equivalent value to these objects. Well, under the new law or Christian dispensation, our altar is our own conscience, just as our offerings are our prayers and treatments. Our burnt sacrifices are the erroneous thoughts that we destroy or burn in spiritual treatment. That's why Jesus says that if when we are about to pray, we remember that we have wrong thoughts or harsh feelings towards our brother, no matter who he is, whether the object of our hostile thought is an individual or a group of people, we must stop there and treat ourselves until we have rid ourselves of this feeling of hostility and have once again restored the flawless evidence of our spiritual integrity. Jesus explains this great lesson again in the Eastern tradition using a series of steps. Firstly, he says that whoever is angry with his brother is in danger. Secondly, actually being hostile towards another represents a serious risk. And finally, having such a low opinion of someone as to consider him irrelevant effectively closes us to any hope of spiritual fruit as long as we remain in that mindset. Calling someone fool in this sense means that we consider nothing good can come from them, and doing so exposes us to very serious consequences. Note well that in the Authorized or Reina Valera version of the Bible, which is by far the best edition for spiritual purposes, makes a serious error here that has been corrected in the Revised Version. It makes Jesus say that he who is angry with his brother without cause, which is a manifest absurdity. No sane person gets angry without what they consider a reason, no matter how insignificant or irrelevant. In reality, what Jesus said is that anyone who is angry with his brother in any circumstance is in danger. Come to terms with your adversary quickly, while you are on the way with him, in case your adversary delivers you to the judge, and the judge delivers you to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out of there until you have paid the last penny. Matthew 5. This paragraph is of major practical importance. Here, Jesus emphasizes the instruction contained in his command to watch and pray. It is much easier to overcome a difficulty if you address it immediately upon its first appearance than when the problem has had time to settle in your mind, to take root, as soldiers say. A soldier knows that as long as troops are marching in open terrain, it is easy for the enemy to scatter and destroy them. But once allowed to settle on solid ground and entrench themselves, they become extremely difficult to eliminate. The same goes for evil. As soon as it presents itself to your attention, you must immediately push it aside, repudiate it, refuse to accept it, and calmly affirm the truth. Give it no chance to take hold. By doing so, you will find that it has little or no power over you. This process will involve a struggle. It may seem for a while that the enemy is gaining ground. However, as long as you address it from the outset, it will quickly disappear, and you will emerge victorious. Conversely, by accepting the error and dwelling on it, you integrate it into your mentality, and if you continue long enough, it can be very difficult to rid yourself of it. Most of us are aware of this from our own experience. It is relatively easy for us, once we have learned to pray scientifically, to overcome new difficulties as they arise. However, older ones, which we have fortified through long acceptance, are difficult to dislodge. Jesus, according to his usual custom, when he wanted to make a particularly important point understood, used a graphic illustration from the daily life of the people around him at that time. The law governing debtors was extremely severe. If a man found himself in debt, he had to settle with his creditor by any acceptable means and as quickly as possible. Even today, it is very important for the debtor to avoid, if possible, having his case come before the courts, as additional costs will be added to the initial debt, and the longer the case drags on, the more costs will accumulate, such as lawyers' fees, court costs, and various other expenses. All of this adds to the debt itself. Indeed, there are cases reported where the costs of legal proceedings far exceed the initial debt. The same applies to the various difficulties we face in daily life. The initial difficulty, as it appears at first, is often multiplied several times over by our mistaken thoughts about it. We do not free ourselves until the complete debt is paid. If we first come to terms with the adversary, meaning if we correct our thoughts about the difficulty, we incur no cost, and the transaction remains straightforward. Let's suppose you sneeze. If you say, "Here we go again, I'm sick again, I'm going to be sick," and proceed, as many people often do, to think about your illness and the various inconveniences that might result from it, you give the issue an opportunity to take root in your mind. Often people start pondering illness in general, and colds in particular. They reflect on the previous days to figure out when they caught the cold, probably concluding with great satisfaction that it must have been due to an open window on Tuesday, or contact with a friend who had a cold on Wednesday, and so on. Then they think about various supposed remedies, although they have found in the past that they are useless. They often speculate on the duration of the upcoming cold and usually set a specific period, like 10 days or 2 weeks, which they assume is the natural length of a cold for one reason or another. Sometimes this goes even further, as they have become accustomed to associating certain secondary conditions with the cold itself, such as bronchitis, temporary deafness, stomach problems, or anything else. Well, we have seen that this is how all these things are produced, and consequently, it naturally follows that they appear in the expected order. If such a person has some general knowledge of truth, after thinking in this manner for some time, they will begin to spiritually treat themselves as best they can. By that time, they will have fortified the error so strongly, allowed it to root itself in such a way, that managing their cold will indeed be quite a difficult affair. If from the very beginning when the error came to their consciousness, i.e. the first moment when they had the possibility of catching a cold through sneezing or feeling cold, they had immediately rejected it, claimed their dominance and asserted the truth, that would probably have been the end of the matter, or at least everything would have ended in a few hours. The same rule applies to any other form of mistaken thought. Business or family difficulties should be handled in exactly the same way. Suppose, upon opening the morning mail, you receive bad news concerning business affairs. You might find a notice informing you that the bank where you deposited most or all of your money has gone bankrupt again. In such a case, it is customary to accept the worst and think about it a lot. Many people, in such a case, would be obsessed with the idea of ruin, thinking about it all day and probably all night too, discussing all its details with other people, imagining all sorts of problems and difficulties that could arise from the event. To all this, in many cases, must be added bitter resentment and condemnation towards the individuals, the bank officials, etc., whom they consider responsible. Even a slight knowledge of the causal power of our thoughts will show us what the inevitable result of all this is, namely, to increase and multiply problems and make their escape increasingly difficult. Naturally, in such a case, a student of the teachings of Jesus Christ would sooner or later begin to dismiss all these thoughts from their mind, replacing them with their knowledge of the true law of being. However, having been taken by surprise by the suddenness and severity of the impact, it may take time before they begin to address the problem in the light of truth, and it is this delay that often significantly increases the difficulty. What needs to be done, according to Jesus, is immediately after becoming aware of bad news to turn to God, their true support, not accepting the insinuation of problems as something obligatory for oneself, literally expelling from their consciousness the thought of loss and danger, as well as the fear and resentment that accompany it. By persisting in this manner until they regain mental peace, they will soon find themselves safe from their difficulty. Somehow or other the problem will disappear, their fortune will be restored. Either the bank will recover quickly, and there is no reason why individual prayer should not save the bank and the fortunes of thousands of people, or if this is not possible for some reason, they will find that an amount of money equal to or greater than what they lost in the bank will come to them from another direction, probably quite unexpectedly. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. This principle will of course apply in the same way to any kind of difficulty, for universal harmony is the true law of being. Any dispute, quarrel, or misunderstanding must be handled in the same manner from the first moment one becomes aware of it. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Matthew 5. With this memorable paragraph, Jesus emphasizes the absolutely fundamental yet unexpectedly profound truth for the world in general, that thoughts matter most. People have always been accustomed to assuming that as long as their actions comply with the law, they have done all that can reasonably be expected of them, and that their thoughts and feelings are of minor importance or solely their own responsibility. But we now know that every outward act is nothing more than the consequence of a thought. Just as the kind of thought we allow to become habitual will eventually find its expression on the plane of action, we now understand, in the light of Christian science, that thoughts are literally things, and our choice of behavior truly lies in our choice of the type of thought we allow to occupy the stage of our mind. In other words, we discover that mistaken thought is as destructive as mistaken action. The logical result of this undeniable fact is quite surprising. It means that if you have greedy thoughts for your neighbor's money, you are a thief in heart, even if you have not yet laid a hand on the cash, and if you continue to harbor such thoughts, it is only a matter of time before they are put into action. And if you willingly nurture hatred, you are a murderer in heart, even if your hands have not moved to kill. Adultery of the heart corrupts the soul, even if your impure thought never materializes physically. Lust, jealousy, and vengeance nurtured mentally involve the soul's consent, and this consent of the soul is the malice of sin, whether corresponding outward acts materialize or not. Guard your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Chapter 4. Do not resist evil, so if your right eye causes you to stumble, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Matthew 5. The integrity of the soul is all that matters. All that concerns us is to obtain it. All we need is to acquire it, for in having it, we possess everything. Therefore, in his teaching, Jesus is almost exclusively concerned with impressing us with the overwhelming fact of its importance and instructing us on how to attain it. He insists that no sacrifice can be too great to secure the integrity of the soul. We must relinquish anything that stands in our way, even if it costs or involves anything. The integrity of the soul must be preserved because all other things, behavior, health, prosperity, flow from it. It is better to sacrifice your own right eye, he says, or cut off your own right hand if necessary, so that the soul obtains the clarity of understanding that is salvation. Whatever stands between us and our true contact with God must disappear. It may be a sin, an unforgiven old grievance, or even greed for the things of this world, but whatever it is, it must go. Things like these, however, are so obvious that the transgressor is at least sure to be aware of them. It is subtle things like self-love or spiritual pride that are harder to detect and master for oneself, but they must be done. Sometimes the practice of a particular profession, association with certain people, or membership in a specific organization may be what stands in our way, and if so, we must not hesitate. The price must be paid. It is said, "Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce." But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Matthew 5. We are informed that in those days, rabbinical law granted divorces for trivial reasons. These marriages that did not work out as well as hoped tended to escape this issue by obtaining an easy dissolution and then trying their luck with another person. It is now understood that lasting happiness cannot be obtained in this way, for as long as you flee from your problem, you will continue to encounter it in a new guise at every turn. The scientific solution is to face your difficulty where it is found, through spiritual treatment or scientific prayer. This applies to marital problems as much, if not more, than any other type, for none of us is perfect, and the complainant will surely have their own flaws, no less than the offender. They must strive, if possible, to make the current marriage a success by using persistent knowledge of spiritual truth from both sides. If the injured spouse firmly sees the truth of Christ in the other, then in almost every case, a happy solution will result. I am aware of several cases where marriages on the brink of dissolution have been saved in this way, with the most satisfying results. A woman said, after a few months of managing her problems spiritually, "The man I was supposed to divorce has disappeared, and the man I married has returned. We are perfectly happy again." Just as moving from one business position to another, or from one place to another, without experiencing a change in consciousness, we find only the repetition of old conditions in a slightly different form. Thus, as a general rule, people who divorce freely in trying one marriage after another tend to end up as dissatisfied as they were in the beginning. The general norm is to fight your problem where you are with prayer. However, there is a limit to what can be expected of a man or woman in marriage. Therefore, in exceptional cases, the lesser evil is undoubtedly dissolution, but this should only be a last resort. It is known that Jesus systematically refrained from establishing strict rules for the details of our conduct, for he knew that if our principles were correct, the rest would sort itself out. And we can be certain that with his extremely practical and sensible management of human problems, he would have made the wisest and most merciful decision in any particular case. For example, the woman caught in the act of adultery, who under the still active Mosaic law of that time should have been stoned to death, was forgiven and sent away in peace by him. However, those who have doubts about their own conduct in this matter have a simple remedy. They should seek guidance for their conduct. They should affirm that divine wisdom enlightens their understanding and directs their actions in this matter, and refrain from taking decisive steps until you find clear guidance within your own conscience. The general rule holds true for all conditions of life. Do not seek to divorce or amputate in agreement, but rather let it dissolve on its own under treatment. This is how the woman who said that the man she married had returned acted. Whatever your dilemma, it can be resolved in the same manner. Furthermore, you have heard that it was said of old, "Do not swear falsely, but perform to the Lord what you have sworn." But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is the throne of God, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Matthew 5. Not swearing at all is one of the cardinal points of Jesus' teaching. This briefly means that you should not make vows, not mortgage your future conduct in advance, not commit to doing or not doing something tomorrow, next year, or in 30 years. You should in no way try to fix your conduct or belief for tomorrow when today itself is sufficient. Each day has enough trouble of its own. An absolutely vital part of his teaching is to constantly seek inspiring direct contact with God, to remain constantly open as a channel for the Holy Spirit to manifest through you. If you decide in advance what you will or will not do, whether you believe or not, whether you think or not, whether you will or will not be, next year or for the rest of your life, and especially when you crystallize this determination by a solemn act of will such as a vow, you do not open yourself to the action of the Paraclete. Rather, it is by this very act that you close the passage. To receive God's guidance, divine wisdom, it is absolutely essential to have an open mind, for it often happens that wisdom is at odds with your current feelings and opinions. However, if you have made a vow or promise for your soul for tomorrow, you are already committed, and the action of the Holy Spirit cannot take place. In fact, This is nothing less than the sin against the Holy Spirit spoken of in the Bible, which has so terrified sensitive hearts, and for which there seems to be a general misunderstanding. The sin against the Holy Spirit is any action on your part that prevents the activity of the Holy Spirit from occurring in your soul. Anything that separates you from the constantly refreshing action of God, which is spiritual life itself. The sanction for this error is spiritual stagnation, and since the only remedy in this case is the direct action of the Holy Spirit, this error tends to prevent that very action, thus creating a condition of vicious stagnation. It is evident that this condition will necessarily persist as long as you persist in the error, so from this point of view the sin is unforgivable. The problem cannot be solved in any way until the victim is willing to change attitude. This disease manifests as spiritual stagnation and an inability to manifest in all aspects, often accompanied by great arrogance and spiritual pride. And naturally, Jesus does not mean that you should not enter into ordinary business commitments, such as renting a house, entering into certain service contracts, etc. Nor does he mean that ordinary swearing before a court is inadmissible. These are matters of legal convenience for commercial transaction among men, and are just and necessary in an orderly society. The Sermon on the Mount, as we have seen, is a treatise on spiritual life, for spiritual life controls everything else. One who understands Jesus' spiritual teaching and puts it into practice will not risk violating honorable agreements. They can be an ideal tenant, a desirable business partner, a reliable witness in court. Many churches still require their ministers, when ordained and generally still young and immature, to solemnly promise or swear to continue believing throughout their lives in the doctrines of their particular sect. This is precisely what Jesus sought to avoid, especially if one prays daily, as one should, for enlightenment and guidance. The only certainty is that you will not continue to hold the same ideas as you age, but rather you will continually examine, expand, and develop them each day. You will die as the person you are, only to be reborn, greater, wiser, and better the next day. In other religious movements, specific members are even required to accept a certain type of rule book or written instructions for their perpetual guidance, but something like this is quite fatal, as it automatically excludes the action of the Holy Spirit in this matter. Some of the youngest and most modern churches are as sadly unspiritual as the oldest. You must always be completely free at all times to manage the affairs of your soul, to let the action of divine wisdom guide you whether to pray or not, to pray in one way or another, for one purpose or another, to read or not read any book that pleases you, to attend or not attend a church or meeting. Just as you are guided by the same deadly spirit, some teachers forbid their students from reading any religious books other than those of their own school. This is such a heinous crime against the very life of the soul that there are no words to adequately characterize it. The most important application of this commandment against the imposition of rigid rules is usually found in the question of our prayers. Many have established strict rules for their prayers or personal devotions, but these sooner or later destroy the spirit of the thing. People always say, "I always start with the Our Father," or with a certain psalm or something else. Others say, "I begin each treatment in such and such a way." All of this is a mistake. You must always pray as you are prompted to do by the action of the Holy Spirit in your soul at that moment. What has power is spontaneous prayer, the thought given to you at the moment. A thought given in this way has 10 times more power than one you consciously choose. However, remember, it is good to avoid strict rules. It is advisable to have a certain type of prayer schedule to refer to when nothing better presents itself. And in fact, almost all beginners will need a schedule for some time. The important thing is to be ready to leave this schedule at any time, under the guidance of the Spirit. There are people who sometimes find themselves in a situation where their prayers seem to be ineffective, and most of the time this is simply because they have remained fixed in fixed forms. In this case, you must seek inspiration in your mind and use the first thought that comes to you, or try to consult the Bible at random. This section also teaches us that we should not provoke specific events or conditions or repetitive solutions to our problems. When you encounter difficulties, You must pray for harmony and freedom and hope to obtain them. You should not try to select the exact solution that will occur or the path things will take. If you firmly commit to obtaining a specific thing, you may, if you have a certain mindset, obtain it, but this exercise of willpower will almost certainly get you into trouble. You will get what you want and then bitterly regret it. Let your yes be yes and your no be no represent what is called in scientific prayer the affirmation and negation respectively. These are the affirmation of truth, harmony, and the omnipresence of God in reality, and the negation of any power in error and limitation. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Matthew 5. Jesus is the most revolutionary of all teachers. He turns the world upside down for those who accept his teachings. When the message of Jesus Christ is accepted, nothing is the same anymore. All values change radically. The things for which time and energy have been spent seem no longer worthwhile, while others, which barely received a passing glance, prove to be the only things that truly matter. Compared to Jesus, all so-called radical revolutionaries and reformers throughout history now seem to have merely scratched the surface, adjusting unimportant external matters, whereas Jesus went straight to the root. Indeed, the old law designed to maintain a certain degree of order, though rudimentary and prepared for a barbaric people, for any kind of law is better than anarchy, had said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This meant that any action of one man towards another was to be endured as punishment, meaning if he killed someone, the law killed him also, or if he poked an eye out of another, his was poked out by the officers of justice. Whatever the measure of mutilation inflicted on another, the same must be inflicted in return. This code was better than nothing, and perhaps not bad as a starting point for barbaric peoples unable to appreciate the abstract idea of justice, unable to look beyond the passion of the moment, lacking imagination to understand a non-obvious penalty. Undoubtedly, this in most cases constituted an effective break on the primitive instinct. Then, as time passed and barbarism gradually transformed into established civilization, this primitive code was slowly modified by public opinion into something less brutal. This was the case with regard to public justice, but in private life, the old code continued to dominate in the hearts and minds of men, even if they were no longer committed to actual acts of violence. And it is not an exaggeration to say that it continues to dominate until the present hour. The desire for revenge, to pay back, to restore balance in some way when we have been hurt or suffered an injustice, or even witnessed things we disapprove of, remains with us, and will remain with us until we definitively become aware of it and destroy it. Vengeance, Bacon said, is a form of wild justice, and natural man has a natural thirst for justice, for true justice is part of divine harmony, and all men, at every stage, seem always to have some intuitive conception of the divine spiritual harmony that lies behind appearances. They consider that the appropriate way to restore balance is obvious, to pay back the wrongdoer. However, it is precisely this fallacious error that lies at the root of all public and private struggles in the world. It is the direct cause of international wars, family and personal quarrels, and as we will learn in the study of Christian Science, it is the cause of most, if not all, of our health and other problems. But Jesus overturns this and says that when someone hurts you, instead of seeking your own vengeance, you must do exactly the opposite. You must forgive him and release him, no matter the provocation and however many times it is repeated. You must do it. You must let him go. For it is only in this way that you can free yourself, that you can possess your own soul. Matching evil with evil, responding to violence with violence and hate with hate, initiates a vicious circle that has no other outcome than to exhaust your own life and that of your brother. Hostility never ceases through hostility, declared the Light of Asia, announcing this great cosmic truth long before, and the light of the world, placed it at the forefront of its teaching, for it is the cornerstone of man's salvation. This doctrine of not resisting evil is the great metaphysical secret to the world. For those who do not understand it, it seems like moral suicide, a capitulation to weakness in the face of aggression. But the light of the revelation of Jesus Christ shows that it is a magnificent spiritual strategy. If you oppose any situation, you give it power over yourself. If you do not mentally resist, it collapses before you. As we have seen before, Jesus is the master of metaphysics and deals only with states of consciousness, thoughts, and beliefs that men accept, for these are the causal things. He does not give instructions on the details of external behavior, so the references here to lawsuits, cloak and tunic, lending and presenting the other cheek, are symbolic illustrations of mental states and should not be taken in a strict literal sense. This statement is in no way an attempt to avoid or gloss over a difficult text. Let us remember that if the thought is correct, the action cannot be incorrect, and that a simple action undertaken for an external motive is just as likely to be incorrect as correct in any particular case. Because there simply are no complete general rules for appropriate behavior, a teacher could never say that a specific act must necessarily be correct at any time, for the play of circumstances in human life is too complicated for such a prediction. For example, anyone with the slightest experience of the world knows that lending money indiscriminately to anyone who asks for it certainly falls within elementary wisdom and justice, whether for oneself or for those who might depend on it, and in most cases it would cause real harm rather than benefit to the supposed borrower. As for literally turning the other cheek after being struck, this action would be very unlikely and would only cause harm to both parties. It is worth noting in particular that Jesus, when struck in Pilate's hall, did not do this himself. Instead, he faced his enemies with great dignity. This commandment to turn the other cheek refers to the change of thought in the face of error, moving from error to truth, and generally acts like magic. Thus, if someone misbehaves, but immediately shifts their attention from human concerns to divinity, and focuses on God or on the real spiritual being of the person in question, it will be found that their behavior changes immediately. This is the secret to dealing with difficult people, and Jesus understood this well. When people cause trouble, you only need to change your thought about them, and they will change too, for your own conception is what you see. This is true retribution. This has been attempted thousands and thousands, perhaps millions of times, and it never fails when properly applied. Often it is quite amusing to see how you act like a pendulum. If someone enters a room in your house, your office, your store, or any other place looking for trouble, just try to shift their attention towards divinity instead of confronting the difficulty aggressively. Depending on their temperament, you will be amused and satisfied to see the anger disappear from their face, which will mean it has also disappeared from their heart, and a very different expression has taken its place. At first, it may be helpful to look away from the person while you give them this treatment, but with a little practice, you will be able, so to speak, to see through them to the truth of being. A lady was disturbed by hearing two men busy with repairs in front of her window. Unaware of her proximity, they began to curse. For a moment, a wave of anger and disdain surged in her mind towards them, but remembering this text, she immediately focused her attention on the divine presence she knew to be in each of them, as it is in all men. She greeted the Christ residing in them, to use our modern expression, and instantly the offensive language ceased. She told me it was as if their speech had been cut off. She must have achieved a good realization, and in this case, it is certain that the two men received a substantial spiritual uplift and may even have been permanently healed of using foul language. Those of us who have worked in truth for a while could cite many similar cases of harmony instantly restored by this simple method of Jesus. I have personally seen several cases where men and even twice children were quarreling, and upon seeing a bystander adopt this attitude, the dispute dissolved like magic. Animals respond even more easily to this treatment than humans. Twice, I have seen dogs fighting violently, and all efforts to separate them had failed. When the recognition of the presence of God's love in all his creatures was restored, peace returned. Sometimes, you find yourself in a very negative conversation where diseases and problems are extensively discussed, or perhaps uncharitable statements are made about absent people, for various reasons. It may be difficult to withdraw from this situation, and if so, your duty is to be clear. You must mentally turn the other cheek, and thus help both the speakers and their victims. "Let him have your cloak also, and go with him," are two dramatic expressions that further emphasize the principle of non-resistance in thought towards seemingly bad conditions. Face your neighbor's attitude with sympathy as much as possible. Admit all points that are not absolutely essential, and redeem the rest with true thought. Of course, never yield to error, but it is the sin, not the sinner, that must be condemned. You have heard that it was said, "You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who mistreat and persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Matthew 5. Thus, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who mistreat and persecute you. Hatred does not cease by hatred. Jesus presents this fundamental truth in a manner so clear and simple that even the smallest child cannot misinterpret it. That is why, instead of hating one who seems to be your enemy, as lower instincts push man to do, you must love him. To curses, you must respond with blessings, and to hatred you must respond with good. For those who go so far as to persecute you, you must pray, definitively and specifically. It is as clear and direct as Jesus says, and then, on the simplest level of understanding, he adds, "If you return love for love, what is extraordinary about that? Of course, nothing, for anyone would do the same. If you truly want to progress and do much more, you must rid yourself of all feelings of resentment and hostility. You must change your own mental state until you feel only harmony and peace within yourself. This is not simply the best practical policy, but for the reasons underlying the entire Sermon on the Mount, it is the only policy by which you can progress. For instance, even physical health will not be possible in the long term without forgiveness and goodwill towards all. And even your material prosperity will vanish if your soul is not free from all hostility and condemnation. Indeed, freedom is the primary condition for all spiritual progress, which anyone with a certain spiritual sense easily recognizes when pointed out. Those who have some understanding of what is called the spiritual idea find here a wonderful lesson in practical spiritual treatment or scientific prayer. In summary, the spiritual ideal is the understanding of the fundamental fact that good is permanent, omnipresent, and all-powerful, and evil is a temporary, insubstantial belief without any real character, which is destroyed by scientific prayer. Therefore, what can be called the secret of spiritual treatment is not to fight against error, which only gives it more life and power, but to destroy it by withdrawing from it the very energy of belief that gives it the only existence it has, temporarily clothing it in your thought. If you withdraw it, it disappears into nothingness. Everything in life depends on the approach you take. Indeed, as Shakespeare says, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Thus, fear, hatred, and resentment are ideas strongly charged with emotion, and when added to any difficulty, they infuse it with fresh and vigorous life, making it even more difficult to overcome. Mentally rethinking old wrongs, recalling how badly someone acted at some point, for example, and remembering the details, produces the effect of reliving what was quietly fading away in the face of a new difficulty of any kind. It is the reception you give it mentally, and the attitude you adopt towards it in your own thought, that completely determines its effect on you. This is what matters, what really counts for you. It is not the words, things, or conditions themselves, but the thoughts and beliefs you have about them. What makes or breaks you are not the actions of others, but your own thoughts. You write your own story for tomorrow and the next year by the thoughts you have today. You sculpt the destiny of your life day by the way you mentally react to the experience that comes your way. Correct reaction is the supreme art of life, and Jesus condensed the secret of this art into one phrase when he said, "Do not resist evil." Understood spiritually, this is the secret of success in life. A proper understanding of this commandment will take you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, regenerate your body, free your soul, and in summary, create your life from top to bottom. The moment you mentally resist an undesirable circumstance, you give it more power, a power that it will use against you. If you face a physical, personal, or professional difficulty, you must not, as most people usually do, mentally fight against it, nor stubbornly stand in the way saying, "You shall not pass." Follow Jesus' master rule. Do not resist evil. Do not mentally resist any problem, meaning do not feed your own psychic substance with it. Mentally seek the presence of God. How would you feel physically if you were suddenly placed in a dark room? Firmly keep your thoughts on this presence, as if it were with you and also in the person or place where the evil has manifested. This is akin to turning the other cheek. If you do this, the difficulty, whatever the undesirable situation or problem caused by someone, will disappear into its native nothingness and leave you free. This is the true spiritual method for loving your enemy. Love is God, and therefore all-powerful. This is the scientific application of love, against which nothing evil can stand. Love destroys the condition of evil, and if it affects a person, it frees them as well as you. Conversely, returning hatred for hatred, curse for curse, or fear with aggression amplifies the problem, just like a faint sound is amplified in volume by an amplifier. Meeting hatred with love in a scientific manner is Christ's royal road to freedom. It is the perfect method of self-defense in all circumstances, rendering you absolutely invulnerable to any kind of attack. If someone becomes personally obnoxious to you, do not mentally resist them. Remember the Christ residing in your enemy and all will be well. They will cease to bother you, change their attitude, or completely disappear from your life. Additionally, by spiritually benefiting from your action, if you receive bad news, do not mentally resist it. Understand the unshakable nature and infinite harmony of the good always available at every point of existence, and things will resolve. If you are unhappy in your work or at home, do not mentally resist these conditions, and do not allow yourself to grumble, complain, or blame. Such actions will only reinforce this particular manifestation of error. Therefore, do not resist evil. Mentally sense the divine presence around you, affirm its reality, and assert your control over all conditions. When you speak the word in the name of the I Am, you will soon be free. Loving your enemies in this scientific manner is also the key to bodily health, without which it is impossible. The realization of divine life and divine love is the secret of physical well-being. All physical improvement stems from it. It does not precede it. Currently, much is said about the influence of glands on our bodily health, but our glands themselves are entirely governed by our emotions. Thus, the way to adjust and regulate the glands is to cultivate the correct feeling. Naturally, this must include subconscious feelings, and this can only be done through perfect treatment, for your Father who is in heaven is perfect. Matthew 5. This commandment of Jesus is one of the most impressive in the entire Bible. Carefully analyze what he says. He commands us to be perfect as God himself is perfect. And since Jesus does not command the impossible, he has here given his authority to the doctrine that it is possible for man to become divinely perfect. Thus we see that man cannot be the miserable, desperate, and disinherited child of perdition that theology has often presented, but even the offspring of God, and potentially divine and perfect, as Jesus says at another time, quoting the ancient scriptures, "I said you are gods, and you are all sons of the Most High." He then added for emphasis, "and the scripture cannot be broken." So, if we are truly children of God, capable of eternal and flawless perfection, there can be no real power in evil, even in sin, that keeps us permanently in bondage. This means that with the right method of working, it can only be a matter of time before we assume our true condition of spiritual salvation. Therefore, let us not waste any more time before starting our ascent. Let us rise now, at this very instant, if we have not already done so, like the prodigal son amid the husks of materiality and limitations, and confidently proclaim in the teachings and promises of Jesus, "I will arise and go to my Father." Those who might be discouraged by a feeling of unworthiness or lack of understanding and feel very far away must remember that all great spiritual teachers agree on the existence of such a thing as the kingdom of heaven. For the one who does the will of my Father in heaven is the one who will enter the kingdom of heaven. Chapter 5. A treasure in heaven. Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise you have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be honored by men. Truly, I say to you, they have their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you openly. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men. Truly, I tell you, they have their reward. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like the pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Matthew 6. The heart of this section of the sermon is contained in verses 6 and 7, particularly the clause, "Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you." The essential element of Jesus Christ's teaching is the doctrine of the secret place and its importance as the control center of the kingdom. Man is the sovereign of a kingdom, although in most cases he does not know it. This king is nothing less than the world of his own life and experience. The Bible is full of stories of kings and their kingdoms, of wise kings and foolish kings, of wicked kings and righteous kings, of victorious kings and defeated kings, of the rise and fall of kingdoms for all sorts of reasons. Jesus, in his parabolic teaching, will often take this same idea and use it as if there were a great king. He often starts with each king representing all men studied under different aspects of their mental perspective. The Bible is the book of all men. It is primarily a textbook of metaphysics, a manual of soul development, and everything in the Bible, from beginning to end, deals in reality with this development, that is, the spiritual awakening of the individual. You and your problems are analyzed from every possible angle, and the fundamental lessons of spiritual truth are presented in all kinds of different forms to meet every condition, every need, and almost every state of mind of human nature. Sometimes you are a king, other times a fisherman, a gardener, a weaver, a potter, a merchant, a high priest, a captain of armies. I would say that the Sermon on the Mount considers you as a king, the absolute sovereign of your own kingdom. For after all, it is the most comprehensive of all similes. If you know the truth of being, you are, as a literal fact, and not just in a rhetorical sense, the absolute monarch of your own life. You create your own conditions and you can undo them. You create and undo your own health according to the type of people and conditions you reveal. You attract wealth or poverty, mental peace or fear, depending on how you govern your kingdom. Naturally, the world does not know this. It assumes that the conditions of someone's life are largely created by external circumstances and other people. The world believes that at any moment one is exposed to unforeseen accidents of all kinds that can be a serious inconvenience or even completely ruin one's life plan. However, the truth of being is exactly the opposite of all this. And since humanity has almost always believed in the erroneous version, it is no wonder that history has been so full of errors, sufferings, and problems. The effort to carry out any enterprise on the basis of erroneous principles, or to reason from a series of erroneous premises, can only result in misery and confusion, and that is naturally what has happened. People have suffered because they have been misled about the nature of life and themselves, and that is why Jesus, the Savior of the world, said, "Know the truth, and the truth will set you free." That is why he devoted the years of his public life to teaching and explaining the truth, telling us about God and man, and instructing us on how to live. It is true that our difficulties arise from our own erroneous thinking in the present and the past. One might well ask, given the sublime level of consciousness Jesus had attained, why did he have to face difficulties from time to time, especially his terrible conflict with fear in the Garden of Gethsemane and his death on the cross? Jesus' case was very different from that of any other person, for he suffered not because of his own erroneous thinking, but because of ours. With his high degree of understanding, he could easily have retired and transcended quietly without any suffering, as Moses and Elijah, for example, had done before him. But he chose voluntarily to undertake his terrible task to help humanity, and that is why he is rightly titled Savior of the World. Let us now consider this kingdom a little more in detail, and we will find that the king's palace, the government office, so to speak, is nothing other than your own consciousness. Your own mentality is your private cabinet, and the affairs dealt with there are the whirlwind of thoughts continually passing through your mind. The psalmist calls it the secret place of the Most High, and it is a secret because no one else knows what goes on there. There is privacy and there is control. You have the power to harbor the thoughts you want. You can choose which thoughts to accept and which to reject. You are the master there. Any thought you choose to dwell on will manifest in the external physical world as things and events. Your choice is to think or not to think in the first place. If you do not want to deal with certain consequences in the near future, you must abstain from thinking about them. If you want to start the engine, you do not open the valve. If you do not want an alarm to ring, you do not press the button. And so, if you truly understand this fundamental principle, you will henceforth watch your habitual thoughts with the greatest care, for it is true that the type of thoughts you entertain in your consciousness, the secret place, will manifest in the present, in your outer life, in your body, and in your affairs. You will no longer think of entertaining discordant thoughts. Remember that whatever the mind dwells on will eventually enter your experience. This does not mean that the concrete thing you think about will be exactly what happens, although sometimes it does. For example, if you think a lot about illness, you tend to undermine your health. If you think a lot about poverty and depression, you tend to attract poverty to yourself. And if you think about problems, conflicts, or dishonesty, what occurs in a specific case will generally not be the precise production of a particular line of thought, but the result of the combined action of that line of thought and your general mental attitude. Thoughts about illness are only one of the two factors that produce bodily ailments, and they are usually the less important. The other, more important factor consists of the accumulation of negative or destructive emotions. Although this fact seems to be very little understood even among students of metaphysics, it is so important that it is simply impossible to overemphasize the fact that most bodily ailments are caused because the patient allows destructive emotions to settle in his mind. Harboring feelings of anger, resentment, jealousy, grudges, etc. is certainly harmful to health in some way. A woman once said, "I have the right to be angry," meaning that she had been the victim of very unpleasant treatment and therefore possessed some sort of license or special permission to harbor feelings of anger without suffering their natural consequences on the body. Of course, this is absurd. There is no one who grants such permission. And even if it could be done, if general laws could be set aside in special cases, we would not have a universe but a chaos. If you press a button, whatever the motive, good or bad, to save a man's life or to kill him, the electric bell will ring because it is the law of electricity. If you accidentally ingest a deadly poison, you will die, or at least your body will be severely affected because that is the law. You may have mistakenly assumed it was a harmless liquid, but that would not change anything because the law does not take intentions into account. Similarly, harboring negative emotions primarily attracts problems, mainly physical ailments, and also problems in general, regardless of any apparent justification you might have. I once found an old sermon preached in London during the French Revolution, where the author, having an extremely superficial view of the gospel, said in reference to the Sermon on the Mount, "It is surely justified to hate Robespierre and to curse the assassin of Rizzo." This statement perfectly illustrates the false idea we have been considering. Harboring hatred is ipso facto involving oneself in undesirable troubles, and for you, there will be no substantial difference in applying the label or pouring bile on the person or object of your resentment. The fact that young Peter is actually a demon or an angel of light has nothing to do with the matter. Allowing oneself to feel animosity toward anyone, regardless of any issue of merit or otherwise concerning the object of one's condemnation, will surely bring trouble upon your own head in proportion to the intensity of the feeling you harbor and the number of times or minutes you dedicate to it. No Christian Scientist finds resentment or exception justifiable under any circumstance. But whatever your opinion on this matter, there is no doubt about its practical consequences for you. You could swallow a dose of prussic acid in 2 gulps and think to protect yourself by saying, "For young Peter," or "For the murderer of Christ," and you would have little doubt about who will benefit from the poison. It is very significant that Jesus calls your consciousness the secret place. He wants, as always, to impress upon us the truth that the internal causes the external, and not the external that causes the condition of the internal. An external thing never causes another external thing. Cause and effect go from the inside to the outside. In theory, this all-encompassing master law is not difficult to understand once it has been clearly stated, but in practice, it is extremely challenging not to lose sight of it amid the hustle and bustle of daily life. Our constitution is such that we can only devote our conscious attention to one thing at a time. And when we are not deliberately attentive to observing this law, if interest in what we are doing or saying does not hold our attention, our already formed thought habits will surely determine the tone of our thinking. In practice, we constantly forget the master law until we have trained ourselves to observe it with the greatest care. In the meantime, as long as we continue to break the law, even in forgetfulness, we will continue to suffer the consequences. It is therefore evident that nothing is worthwhile, nothing truly matters, except a change of policy in the secret place. Think correctly, and sooner or later, everything will be well on the outside. If you are satisfied with a change in external observation without also changing your thoughts and feelings, not only are you wasting time, but you may easily fall asleep with a false sense of security in the fool's paradise. It is very likely that you will then fall into the sin of hypocrisy. It is necessary to emphasize that since time immemorial, humanity has cherished the pathetic illusion that external acts, so easy to perform, can replace an internal change of thought and feeling, so difficult to achieve. It is very easy to buy and use ceremonial clothing, to recite prayers by heart at certain times, to use stereotyped forms of devotion, to attend religious services at prescribed periods, and to leave the heart unchanged. For the Pharisees, it took only a moment to don their appearance, but the purification of the heart requires hours and years of sincere prayer and self-discipline. A prominent scholar said a few years ago, "In my youth we ceased wearing the distinctive garb of the Quakers and a few other usages, for we realized that people who were far from genuinely interested in our Quaker ideals were joining us for the educational advantages they could obtain for their children, as well as other benefits of our membership. It was easy to dress as a friend, to buy and wear a coat without buttons or a collar, and to insert a few grammatical peculiarities into conversation, leaving the character completely unchanged. The Quakers are not the only ones who have had to face this problem. In reality, this danger was the rock upon which Puritanism eventually foundered. The Puritans ultimately insisted on external conformity in all sorts of non-essential points, imposing civil and sometimes penal sanctions for their non-compliance, even on matters to which no statute could apply. And to understand that a particular behavior, a style of dress, the liberal use of an artificial phraseology, tactics such as giving one's children extravagant Old Testament names would constitute passports for advancement in civil, ecclesiastical, and often even commercial life, as if these trivialities could have spiritual value in themselves, and were not in reality the simplest form of opening an easy path to spiritual pride and blatant hypocrisy. It is undeniable that the spiritualization of thought in practice makes what previously seemed important now insignificant and uninteresting. It is also indisputable that as one gradually meets different people, reads different books, spends one's time differently, one's conversation naturally changes too. The old things are passed away. Behold, I make all things new. These things follow the change of heart. They can never precede it. Now let us see how futile the foolish attempt to acquire popularity or cultivate the good opinion of others is, under the impression that this can be of any real benefit to us. The one who is heard in the Sermon on the Mount had often seen among the Pharisees the lowest perform good deeds in the most ostentatious manner to gain a reputation for being exceptionally orthodox and holy, probably thinking they were also promoting their spiritual well-being. In this section, Jesus analyzed and exposed this type of fallacious reasoning once and for all. He states that the applause that follows external acts is the only reward they bring, and that the worthwhile results are obtained only in the secret place of the consciousness, where we scientifically pray to the Father in secret, and He will reward us openly with an authentic demonstration. Jesus also emphasizes here the necessity of keeping our prayers alive. It is useless to limit oneself to mechanically repeating a phrase like a parrot would. Vain repetitions in prayer must be constantly on the lookout, being receptive, not negative, but receptive to divine inspiration. There is no objection to constantly repeating a useful phrase, even unconsciously, as long as it does not become mechanical. Jesus himself repeated his words 3 times at the moment of his extreme need in the garden. If at any point you feel bored with your prayers, stop, go do something else, and come back later with a fresh mind. Your Father knows what you need before you even ask Him. We do not have to create good because it exists eternally, due to the omnipresence of God. However, we must manifest it through our own personal realization of the truth. This text does not say that we should not pray in relation to specific needs or problems. Some have interpreted it to mean that we should only work for general harmony, but this is incorrect. If we strive only for general harmony, the results of our work will extend to all areas of our life, and the improvement in a particular detail may be as minimal as insignificant. It would be appropriate to focus your prayers on what you wish to manifest at that particular moment. It is true that one does not pray for something as an object in itself, but when we feel a lack, whether of money, a home, a friend, we are dealing with ourselves, the soul of that feeling of lack. Once we have prayed sufficiently to correct our understanding of it, what we need will appear as evidence that the work has been done on the feeling of lack within us, with a sense of divine love. Thus the missing thing will appear in your life on its own after your prayers. When saying your prayers, never be afraid to be too specific, precise, and serious. Jesus himself was all of these. Therefore pray in this way: Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. Matthew 6. The greatest prayer of all, commonly called the Lord's Prayer, is actually a superb summary of all the teachings of Jesus Christ in an incomparable manner for its brevity and fullness. It is truly a complete outline of Christian metaphysics, and since the author of this book has already extensively covered it in a pamphlet titled The Lord's Prayer, there is no need to revisit the same ground here. Suffice it to say that in these few verses, it defines the nature of God and man and explains the true relationship between them. It tells us what the universe really is and provides a method of rapid spiritual development for those who use it intelligently. Notice how strongly Jesus emphasizes the necessity of forgiveness if we want to progress spiritually. Moreover, when there is fasting, he says, "Do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you openly." Matthew 6. At that time, fasting was a widespread practice among the people, and Jesus implies this practice. Fasting, as we understand it in Christian Science, is the abstention from certain primarily negative or erroneous thoughts. Of course, although in some cases it is necessary for a demonstration, abstaining for a certain time from thinking about a specific problem is not enough to overcome it. In this case, it is better to give the problem a final and definitive treatment. Then leave it alone for a while, or physically entrust it to another person to take care of it for you, after which keep your thoughts completely away from it. Physical fasting has occasionally proven useful for overcoming a problem, particularly what is called a chronic difficulty, when it is accompanied, of course, by spiritual treatment. This is mainly due to the high degree of concentration that accompanies physical fasting. Notice that verse 18 is essentially a repetition of verse 6. If the Bible repeats itself in this way, it is an indication that a point of paramount importance is being addressed. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moths nor rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Matthew 6. Once he has spoken about the nature of the secret place and given prayer or divine realization as the key to life, Jesus continues to emphasize certain consequences that arise from all this, in order to show us how we must quickly reform our entire lives, according to this new basis. Now that we understand that the material plane is nothing more than the realization of thought, we should realize the absurdity of collecting or trying to collect large sums of money, possessions, or material properties of any kind. If your consciousness is correct, that is, if you understand God correctly as the loving source of your unlimited supply, you will always have the amount of money or goods you need, wherever you are and whatever your conditions. You cannot lack anything once you have truly understood that in the divine mind, demand and supply are one. In conclusion, it is pointless to devote too much attention to accumulating material possessions that are as vulnerable to change and hazards as moth and rust or thieves. People who devote a reasonable portion of their time and attention to seeking material goods should spend this time in scientific prayer and meditation. But the change in consciousness that would occur would put them beyond any possibility of suffering from any of these dangers. If they had sufficient spiritual understanding of supply, their investments would probably not go wrong. However, if they did, their losses would be immediately replaced in another way before they had time to suffer. If on Monday the bank where your fortune was deposited ceased to pay, probably before the weekend, an equivalent sum of money would arrive from elsewhere, as much as you might need. If you had sufficient spiritual understanding anyway, the possessor of a consciousness of prosperity cannot become poor, nor can the possessor of a consciousness of poverty become permanently rich. In time, no one can retain what does not belong to them by right of consciousness, and be deprived of what is truly theirs by the same supreme right. Therefore, you would do well not to accumulate treasures on earth, but rather to accumulate treasures in heaven, that is, the understanding of spiritual law. If you seek happiness or security in external, fleeting and unchangeable things, you are not putting God first. If you put God first in your life, you will not find yourself working under excessive anxiety for nothing. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Continuing in the same vein with more details, Jesus goes on to say that those who are on the new basis must be free from all sorts of small anxieties and worrisome details that continue to afflict those who are not. For instance, dietary issues will resolve themselves if one thinks correctly. An adherent of the new life does not need to watch every bite they put in their mouth. They feed naturally and spontaneously on the ordinary food presented to them, knowing that their habitual correct thinking will also take care of their diet. The same principle applies to all the details of daily life. If you take care of yourself in the right way every day, you will find that the minor things in life will gradually fall into place correctly on their own, without any trouble on your part. Contrast this with the usual method of trying to do everything correctly by separately organizing 1,000 insignificant details. and you will appreciate how the new spiritual basis sets you free. When your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. This is the synthesis of all truth. Certainly, if the eye is single, the whole body of experience will be full of light. The eye symbolizes spiritual perception. Whatever you pay attention to governs your life. Attention is the key. Your free will lies in the direction of your attention. Whatever you firmly direct your attention to will enter your life and dominate it. If you do not constantly direct your attention to anything in particular, and many people do not, then nothing in particular will enter your life except uncertainty and suspense. You will be like a drifting log. Conversely, if you direct your attention to the outer world of manifestation, which is by its nature continually changing, you will be doomed to unhappiness, poverty, and poor health. On the other hand, if you direct your attention to God, if the glory of God is first in you and the expression of His will becomes the rule of your life, then your eye will be single, and your whole body or incarnation will be full of light. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and wealth. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? And why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. So if God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will He not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For the pagans seek all these things. Your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Many Christians have accepted these facts theoretically, but have been less than lukewarm in their practical application. This hesitation has plunged us into the mass of difficulties that always follow inconsistency and weakness. Those who rely entirely on the material basis generally fare better, for at least they live according to what they know best and play the game as they understand it. Pretending to rest sometimes on one basis and sometimes on the other is like trying to serve two masters, which, of course, is impossible. You cannot serve both God and wealth. A person is essentially spiritual, made in the image and likeness of God, and is therefore designed for the spiritual basis and will not truly succeed on any other. The birds of the air and the lilies of the field offer an amazing lesson to humans in their complete adaptation to the laws of their respective planes. They fully express their true nature without knowing the slightest concern or anxiety that distorts so many human lives. The lilies mentioned are beautiful wild poppies of the East, and anyone who has seen a field of poppies dancing and swaying in the breeze will appreciate the sense of relaxation, freedom, and joy that Jesus had in mind as our true birthright. Naturally, He did not mean that you, as a human being, should literally copy the life or methods of birds or flowers, or be an infinitely superior being to them in the scale of creation. What He means is that you should adapt to your element as they do to theirs. Your true element is the presence of God. Augustine said, "You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." By accepting the truth that man lives in God as completely and indisputably as birds or flowers accept the truth of their condition, his life will take the path for which it was designed. And anyone who would be foolish enough to take these beautiful symbols literally instead of spiritually, and lie down, let's say, in a field among the poppies waiting for God to perform a spectacular miracle in His favor, would quickly learn from experience that this is not the way to go. Possessing faculties infinitely superior to the plant or animal kingdoms, truly imitating their wisdom and glory, means being constantly active in your own realm, that of prayer and meditation. The spiritual foundation does not mean remaining inactive at will, but intensifying activity, but on the spiritual plane, and not materially alone. Thus one can say that one seeks first the kingdom of heaven, and from there all necessary things will be found. If you are very worried and confused or very discouraged, it is time to rest among the poppies mentally, to read the Bible, to pray gently but constantly until something happens, whether inside you or in the external panorama. This is not a miracle formula, for prayer helped a woman in London who seemed to have fallen into total despair, indicating total ruin. I persuaded her to let go of the whole burden mentally and allow the worst to happen, while she spent 2 or 3 days associating with the Bible and praying for peace. Within a week, everything magically resolved itself without her taking any material action. The normal way to provide for oneself is to pursue a useful trade or profession in which one feels happy and satisfied in doing good work and receiving generous compensation for it. Scientific prayer will place anyone in such a position if they do not already possess it. Thus, if every day now you understand your true place and claim the opportunities for service, your actual position will continually improve over time. Naturally, this does not necessarily mean that one should go into business. For example, the woman who takes care of household tasks is as useful a citizen as anyone in the country. Many people whose private incomes prevent them from earning money lead very useful lives in developing literature, the arts, and other activities. What is true is that no one on a spiritual basis will lead a life of leisure, no matter how much money they possess. Sometimes we hear curious stories of people claiming to be so spiritual that they do not feel obligated to work for a living. However, this mental precision speaks for itself. If your understanding of metaphysics is sufficient to enable you to do without ordinary work, you will be automatically provided for and lead a comfortable life. However, this is impossible to apply for people in debt or dependent on others. If you truly wish to test the experience of relying on the power of the Word, make sure what you are doing is genuine. The only way for this test to be genuinely conducted is to let it prove itself or starve. If you are secretly hoping for someone else to come to your rescue, you are not truly relying on the Word. Every Christian Scientist is entitled to reasonable prosperity, which means enough to live with decent comfort and reasonable security. Until you can truly demonstrate this solely through the power of the Word, you should use your treatment to find a suitable work position for yourself. Jesus states in this section that by thinking, we cannot add a cubit to our stature. This is another way of declaring the great truth he expresses in so many ways, that we must be born again. As long as you remain the person you are, you cannot by mere thought be or do anything other than what you are. For of course you always do what you are. You can only transform into a different person, and this can only be done by attaining a certain realization of the presence of God. Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Generally, in scientific prayer, we work in the present time. The goal of scientific prayer is to adjust consciousness, and this must necessarily be done in the present. If a problem related to your future arises, for example, if you have to take an exam in 6 months or if you dread a trip next week, then it is correct to pray about it now, in the present. Do not wait for the moment to arrive to work on it. Instead, act on your own consciousness now and in the present. Even if the fact is in the future, thinking about it now means it is present in the consciousness, and as the thought is present, you can and must work on it in the present time. Similarly, you can treat past events and must do so if they still concern you, treating them in the present, for the thought about them is present. Always remember that the only thought that should concern you is the present. The thought of yesterday or last year does not matter anymore. If you can adjust your current thinking so that everything is well here and now, everything else will follow. The best way to prepare for tomorrow is to make today's consciousness serene and harmonious. All goodness will come after that. Never rummage through your mind for problems to pray or treat. Faithfully address those that come to your attention, and hidden things will be taken care of in the same spirit. Christian Science advises not to be overly concerned about the next plane and conditions after death. Often, these concerns are nothing more than an escape from our reality and the daily problems that must be faced and resolved here. We must focus on life, not death, and act correctly here and now. Chapter 6. What measure do you tell me not to judge, so that you will not be judged? For the judgment you make on others will be applied to you, and the measure you use will also be used for you. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and not notice the beam in your own? Or how can you say to your brother, "Let me remove the speck from your eye," when there is a beam in your own eye, hypocrite? First, remove the beam from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Matthew 7. This section of the Sermon on the Mount comprises 5 brief verses and only about 100 words. However, it is not an exaggeration to say that it is the most surprising document ever presented to humanity throughout its history. These 5 verses say more about the nature of man, the meaning of life, the importance of behavior, the art of living, the secret of happiness and success, the way to solve problems, the approach to God, the liberation of the soul and the salvation of the world, than all that all philosophers, theologians, and sages have taught together. For it explains the great law, which is much more important for a man, and even for a child, to understand the meaning of these 5 verses than to learn anything else taught in schools or colleges. No ordinary course of studies contains anything. There is nothing to learn in any library or laboratory that is a fraction of the wisdom contained here. If one were ever to justify the fanaticism of "burn all other books because everything is in this one," it would refer to these words: "Do not judge so that you will not be judged, for with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be returned to you." If the common mortal could grasp even for a moment the meaning of these words, and truly believed in their truthfulness, it would immediately revolutionize their entire life from top to bottom. It would transform their daily behavior so radically that in a relatively short time, even their closest friends would hardly recognize them, whether it be the Prime Minister or the man on the street. This understanding would turn the world upside down for them. And because this thing is contagious beyond measure, it would turn the world upside down for many. Every time we reread this Sermon on the Mount with a fresh mind, we are surprised to see how its most challenging statements have been quietly ignored in practice by the majority of the Christian world. If someone did not know that these words are constantly heard in public and read in private by millions and millions of Christians of all kinds, they could hardly believe it possible, because the truths they teach seem to be the last things people consider for their daily conduct. Yet they express the simple and unavoidable law of life, the law of life whereby, as we think, speak, and act towards others, others will think, speak, and act towards us. The behavior we show will inevitably come back to us. Everything we do to others will also be done to us at some point, somewhere. What we do well to others will return to us in the same measure, and what we do harm to others will also return. This does not mean at all that the same people to whom we do good or harm are the ones who will repay the action, but what happens is that at another time or in another place, often far away and much later, someone else completely unaware of the previous action will repay it to us. Grain by grain, for every unpleasant word you say, someone will repeat it against you. The more you deceive, the more you will be deceived. Every time you cheat, you will be cheated. Every time you lie, you will be lied to. Every time you neglect a duty, responsibility, or misuse your authority over others, you do something for which you will inevitably have to pay, suffering a similar loss yourself. With the measure you give, you will be measured. Isn't it clear that if people became aware that all this is literally true, it would deeply influence their behavior? This would lead to a reduction in crime and an elevation of the level of morality for all of us. People have a strong tendency to think, especially when they are strongly tempted, that they can probably escape the law of the land, deceive the police, or evade authority in some way. They believe individuals will forgive them, or that they cannot take revenge for their actions, or that the matter will be forgotten at some point, or better still, they will never be discovered. But if they understood that the law of retribution is an impersonal and unchanging cosmic law, just like the law of gravity, disregarding persons or respecting institutions without malice but without mercy, they would think twice before treating others unfairly. The law of gravity never sleeps. It is never out of service or on pause. It never tires. It is neither compassionate nor vindictive. No one would think of trying to dodge it, deceive it, bribe it, or intimidate it. People accept it as something inevitable and unavoidable, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. The law of retribution is akin to the law of gravity. Water always finds its level sooner or later, and our treatment of others eventually comes back to ourselves. Upon hearing the explanation of the law of retribution, some Christians objected that this was Buddhism or Hinduism and not Christianity. It is quite true that this law is taught by Buddhists and Hindus, wisely because it is the law of nature. It is also true that this law is better understood in Eastern countries than with us, but that does not make it an Eastern possession. It simply means that Orthodox Christian churches have largely neglected the task of clarifying an important part of Christian teaching for the people. To those who say that this goes against Christianity, I ask a question. Is the Gospel according to Matthew a Christian document or not? Was Jesus Christ a Christian or a Buddhist? The doctrine may please you or not, and if you wish, you can try to ignore it, but you cannot deny that Jesus Christ taught it in the most direct and categorical manner when he said, "Do not judge so that you will not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and with the measure that you use, it will be measured to you." A beautiful description of the law was written for English speakers by Sir Edwin Arnold in The Song Celestial. To no one is it permitted to defeat it. He who contravenes it forfeits, and he who serves it gains. The good hidden rewards itself with peace and happiness, the evil hidden with pain. With this, the murderer's knife stabs himself, the unjust judge has lost his own defender, the lying tongue condemns its own falsehood. The crafty thief and plunderer steal only to see and mark themselves everywhere. All the good you do rewards your evil. The same retribution must be rendered, even if justice delays much. Now let us see what it is best not to do. Do not do to anyone what you would not want done to yourself, for that is what will happen, especially if you act wrongly towards someone who is under your power. However, it is a law that works both ways, so it is equally true that for every good action you perform, for every kind word you say, you will receive in like manner at some time or another an equivalent. Often, people complain of the ingratitude of those they have helped, but this complaint shows a false mentality that must be corrected. If you feel hurt because someone has been ungrateful for your kindness, it shows that you sought gratitude, and that is a great mistake. It is our duty to help others as far as possible, wisely, for it is an act of love towards one's neighbor. Of course, you will not seek reward in return, and having fulfilled your duty must be its own reward. Remember that if you want somehow the action to be surely recognized, asking for gratitude forces the other person to feel perhaps something they may not and probably will not consciously perceive, and they will be strongly annoyed, for such a thing is highly repugnant to human nature. When you act for good and move on without expecting or desiring personal recognition, is it not a beautiful and encouraging thought that all the prayers you have made in your life and all the good actions and kind words you have been responsible for are still with you, and nothing can take them away from you? Indeed, our prayers and words and acts of kindness towards others are the only things we retain, for everything else must disappear. Errors of thought, speech, and action are resolved and satisfied under the law. But good lasts forever without time modifying it. Those who study Christian science and understand the power of thought will realize that it is here in the realm of thought that the law finds its true application. They will see that the only thing that ultimately matters is maintaining right thoughts about others as well as oneself. A correct thought about God, neighbor, and oneself constitutes the law. Knowing that control resides in the inner sanctuary, that is where they will direct their attention. By observing the maxim "judge not" in Christian Science, the golden rule is to think of others as you would like them to think of you. Given the knowledge we have now, fulfilling this rule becomes a solemn duty, but more than that, it is a vital debt of honor. This debt of honor is a commitment that cannot be enforced by law, but depends on the honor and self-respect of the debtor. Similarly, since no one can know or prove how we think, we are not accountable for our thoughts before any court, except before the highest of all, the court that never errs and whose judgments are never contested. The student, after gaining an understanding of what the great law is and how it works, as Jesus so wonderfully summarizes in this section, is able to take the next great step and understand how it is possible to rise even above the great law itself in the name of Christ. The term Christ in the Bible is not identical to Jesus as an individual. It is a technical term that can be briefly defined as the absolute spiritual truth about everything. Thus, knowing this truth about every person, condition, or circumstance will immediately bring that person back to the extent that this truth is realized by the thinker. This is the essence of spiritual healing. We see, therefore, that in a broader sense, and regardless of the special and unprecedented work that Jesus did for us, it is true that Christ comes into the world to redeem and save it. Whenever Christ, that is, the true idea relative to everything, is elevated in thought by anyone, healing occurs, whether physical, moral, or even intellectual, as the case may be. Intellectual healing concerns a person who is troubled or stupid becoming bright and intelligent. People with academic problems respond magically to this type of treatment. We should claim for them divine intelligence and understand that God is the soul of man. Illness and sin, poverty and confusion, weakness of character, all of these vanish under the healing power of Christ, no matter how deep the problem. Someone's understanding of Christ, or the spiritual truth behind appearances, heals everything, without exception. This is because Christ is nothing less than the direct action of God. Knowledge of the Spirit nullifies everything else. The higher laws of the Spirit replace or supersede all lower laws of the physical and mental planes. As we have seen in the first chapter, this does not mean that the laws of the physical or mental planes are broken, but rather that man, due to his essential divine nature, has the ability to rise above these domains to the infinite dimension of spirit, where such laws no longer affect him. He has not broken these laws, but ventured beyond them. A very inadequate metaphor could be cited in the case of a balloon drifting away from the ground, seemingly defying the law of gravity as soon as it is inflated. In this case, it seems that the law of gravity is broken. But of course, it is not broken, but fully complied with through such action. However, the ordinary experience of life is now reversed. The law of karma, which makes no exceptions and forgets nothing, is actually a law that acts only for matter and mind, not for spirit. Here, everything is perfect and eternal, an immutable good. There is no bad karma to reap because none can be sown. Thus, when man, through what we call prayer, meditation, or treatment, shifts his attention to the domain of spirit, he finds himself to that extent under the law of perfect good, and karma disappears. So man has the choice between karma or Christ. This is the greatest news ever brought to humanity, which is why it is called the good news or the gospel, as that is the meaning of the word. Here is man's letter of freedom, his power over all things as the image and likeness of God. He can choose to remain in the limited realm of matter and mind, in which case he is firmly attached to the wheel of karma, or he can appeal through prayer to the realm of spirit, that is, to Christ, to be free. In Eastern countries where karma is also understood, they lack the Christian message of Christ, and therefore find themselves in a rather desperate position. Conversely, we who rightly understand the gospel of Christ can be free. In other words, karma proves inexorable only as long as you do not act. As soon as you pray, you begin to rise above karma. That is, you begin to erase the unpleasant consequences of past errors. Faced with any mistake, you must suffer the consequences, what we call being punished, or eliminate them through scientific prayer, the practice of God's presence. You have the great choice, Christ or karma. This means that any mistake, any foolishness, even a heinous sin, can be erased from the book of life, with all the punishment or suffering that naturally corresponds to it. It is needless to say that the consequences of an error cannot be avoided with superficial prayer, as this is not the case. Superficial prayer is not sufficient. Adequate knowledge of God is necessary to fundamentally change the character of the sinner, to erase the punishment that otherwise must always follow sin. Once a proper prayer or treatment has been made for the sinner to become a new being and not wish to repeat sin, then he is shielded from the punishments that pursued him. Since Christ is the Lord of Karma, chapter 7, by their fruits you shall know them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? Intelligence is as essential a part of the Christian message as love. Indeed, God is love, but he is also infinite intelligence. If these two qualities are not balanced in our lives, we do not attain wisdom, for wisdom is the perfect blend of intelligence and love. Love without intelligence can inadvertently cause much harm, as a spoiled child is a clear example, and intelligence without love can end in subtle cruelty. True Christian activity will express wisdom. It often happens that, when people discover the truth, and perhaps free themselves from overwhelming difficulty, they rejoice so much that they rush to spread their discovery to others without discernment, and probably urge them to accept the truth. It is quite understandable that this happens, as love desires to share its blessings. However, it is nonetheless very imprudent. The fact is that accepting truth involves, as we have seen before, the rejection of all old norms, but this can only occur if the person is spiritually prepared for change. When a person is spiritually prepared, they will willingly accept truth if it is presented to them in an appealing manner. If they are not prepared, no discussion or intellectual argument will make them ready. Never trust your own judgment to determine who is ready for truth and who is not. If you do not rely on the inspiration of the Holy Spirit to guide you, most of us have experienced, when we first understood the spiritual idea and what it means, choosing some of our friends whom we were sure would accept it, only to find that in most cases they refused to accept it. Conversely, several people whom we decided, in our insensitivity, to consider as not spiritual, were ready and open to accept this spiritual idea. Because they did not seem to be, they gladly accepted it. If you regularly pray for wisdom, intelligence, and new opportunities for service, the right people will come to you, and you will be led to them. An appropriate opportunity will present itself to discuss the subject when you are with someone, and hesitate to talk about truth. In this case, do not do it. Trust in guidance, and leave the matter to God's action. Sometimes nothing happens. No suitable opportunity arises while you are with your friend, which means it is not the right time, and speaking would not have done any good. However, it often happens that an obvious opening in the conversation occurs after receiving treatment, or an external incident provides an opening to introduce the subject. I have seen some very surprising and pleasant awakenings occur in such cases. Above all, avoid forcing the subject of truth on the people you live and work with, especially in your home. It is easy to become a constant nuisance by imposing certain ideas on people who cannot appreciate them because they are not ready. Since members of your household and business partners naturally have a lot to do with you and vice versa, such a policy would likely lead to much conflict or even ill will. Try to understand that in the absence of your personal awakening, they cannot see things as you do. It is also possible that you may not be very skilled at presenting your ideas in the best way. Finally, remember that those with whom you interact closely will monitor your behavior. They will be familiar with many of your faults and weaknesses, and if you speak too much and with little wisdom regarding spiritual enlightenment, they will surely judge your actions in light of what you have said on every occasion. In other words, rushing slowly will not help at all in spreading truth. The fact that you have the reputation of being a fanatic or radical will spread faster than anything else. By being a living example of the benefits of truth, people will notice the change in you and will come to you of their own accord, begging to share your secret. They will not need to be encouraged to drink from the sources of life. When you want to present truth to a particular person or group of people, the right thing to do is to prepare yourself through daily treatment for several days, or even better, 1 or 2 weeks. It is necessary to work for intelligence, love, and above all wisdom, which as we have seen is the right combination of the first two. Ask God's action to make you say what is right at the right time, and also to endow your people and listeners with the same qualities. Do not allow yourself to worry at all about the outcome of the discussion. Express the truth and leave the results. After a few days of such spiritual preparation, the results tend to surprise you. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks it will be opened. Or which one of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? Matthew 7 is the wonderful passage where Jesus sets forth the fundamental truth of God's fatherhood. This can be called the fundamental truth because it is the cornerstone upon which the entire structure of true religion is built. Before men could grasp the significance of God's fatherhood and what it implies, they could scarcely attain a satisfactory religious experience. As long as men believed in the existence of many gods, a solid religious experience was possible, for any authentic religious experience is a quest for conscious communion with the One. Many gods must necessarily be gods of limitation, and as they were always and necessarily presented in conflict with one another, this could only lead to chaotic thought. Those who had moved beyond this idea to grasp the concept of the one true God still almost universally regarded him as a kind of Eastern tyrant king or sultan who owned and ruled man with an iron scepter, just as one would expect a capricious human tyrant to act in many writings of the Old Testament. God is a very jealous despot, vengeful and cruel, a sultan who is almost impossible to satisfy, who shows himself ruthless in his anger and then indifferent in his vengeance, seems to have less in common with humanity than men have with animals. Indeed, he has much less, as we conceive that we share many limitations of the lowest creatures in a common susceptibility to suffering, hunger, and death. This Oriental view of God as Sultan was in fact the view held by many sincere Orthodox Christians until very recent times. A modern and ingenious writer has compared this God to a certain English millionaire who maintains a private zoo near London as his own personal hobby. The zoo houses a whole series of creatures that exist solely for the interest and pleasure of their owner. He visits his zoo from time to time, undoubtedly acting on expert advice, ordering the destruction of certain animals, the movement of others to more comfortable cages, and treating some of them in one way or another. Naturally, he has no spiritual communion with them. They are just so many animated toys that exist for his amusement. This is in no way an exaggerated description of the ideas held by many fundamentalists. In this passage, Jesus once and for all strikes at the root of this horrible superstition. For those who read their Bible with an open mind, he definitively and clearly states here that the true relationship between God and man is that of father and son. In this case, God ceases to be the distant potentate who deals with submissive slaves and becomes the loving father of us, his children. It is extremely difficult to grasp the magnitude of this statement for the soul. If you read and reread each day this section dealing with the fatherhood of God for a few weeks, you will find that it alone answers many of your religious problems. I may venture to say that you will be considerably surprised by the large number of perplexing questions it will solve once and for all. Jesus' teaching on the fatherhood of God is original and unique. In the Old Testament, God is never invoked as a father. In cases where his fatherhood is mentioned, it is about him as the father of the nation and not of individuals. Indeed, this is why Jesus made the declaration of God's fatherhood the opening clause of what we call the Lord's Prayer. This explains, for example, the formidable statement in Genesis that man is in the image and likeness of God. Naturally, it is axiomatic that offspring must be of the same nature and kind as the parent. Thus, if God and man are truly father and son, man, despite all his current limitations and all appearances to the contrary, must be essentially divine and capable of growing, improving, and infinitely developing on the upward path of divinity. That is to say, as the true nature of man, his spiritual character unfolds, meaning as he becomes increasingly aware of it, he will expand into spiritual consciousness until he has transcended all the limits of human imagination. Our glorious destiny refers to this, as we have already seen. Jesus himself elsewhere quotes ancient writings. I said, "You are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you." Then he underscored his point by significantly adding, "And Scripture cannot be broken." Thus, in this passage, we are once and for all freed from the last link of the final chain that binds us to a limited and degraded destiny. We are children of God, and as such we are heirs to our Father's property. We are neither strangers nor wage servants, let alone slaves. We are children of the household, and one day we will enjoy our inheritance. Currently we are full of limitations and incapacities, for spiritually we are only minors. Children are irresponsible, lacking in wisdom and experience, and must be kept under control to prevent their mistakes from causing them serious consequences. But as soon as man reaches spiritual majority, then, as we have seen before, he asserts his rights and obtains them. The heir, when he is a child, differs nothing from a slave, though he is lord of all. But he is under guardians and trustees until the time set by his father. But when the fullness of time comes, truth awakens, and man obtains his spiritual majority. He realizes that it is God's own voice within his heart calling him, Abba, Father. Then he finally knows that he is the son of a great king, and that everything his father has is his for the using, be it health, provisions, opportunities, beauty, joy, or any other thought of God. The most perverse fact of life is man's slowness, or rather his reluctance, to perceive his own dominion. Indeed, God has given us dominion over all things, but we shrink back like frightened children from assuming it, even though assuming it is the only way out for us. Often humanity is like a fugitive sitting in the driver's seat of a car, ready to drive him to safety, but dares not grasp the controls and start the car. He sits almost frozen in terror, looking over his shoulder, wondering if his pursuers will catch up with him and what will happen to him if they do. At any moment, he could make himself safe, but he will not. He dares not. Jesus, who understood the human heart like no one before or after him, understood our difficulty and weakness in this regard, and with his unique gift of living words, his power to present fundamental truth in such a simple, direct and striking manner that even a child could not miss it, he commands us, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks it will be opened. It is impossible to imagine the subject in question being expressed more definitively and convincingly than in these words. There are no words in any language that could be clearer or more emphatic. And yet in their vast majority, Christians silently ignore them or reject their meaning until they are left with words without any meaning. As I have indicated before, we are compelled to believe that Jesus meant what he said, or that he did not. And since we can hardly believe that he did not, or that he could speak without meaning due to lack of understanding, we are therefore obliged to accept these words as true. Indeed, where is the place for elevation? Ask and it will be given to you. Is it not the charter of personal freedom for every man, woman, and child on earth? Is it not the decree of emancipation of slaves from all kinds of physical, mental, or spiritual bondage? What room does this leave for the supposed Christian virtue of resignation so often preached? The fact is that resignation is not a virtue at all. Rather, resignation is a sin. What we often dignify under the pretty name of resignation is actually an unhealthy mix of cowardice and laziness. We do not have to resign ourselves to any kind of disharmony, for disharmony cannot be God's will. It is impossible to accept with resignation illness, poverty, sin, struggle, infidelity, or remorse. On the contrary, we do not have the right to accept anything less than freedom, harmony, and joy, for it is only with these things that we glorify God and express his holy will, which is our reason for being. Out of loyalty to God, it is our most sacred duty to refuse anything other than happiness and complete success. For we will not fulfill Jesus' wishes and instructions if we settle for less. We must weep, meditate, and continuously and tirelessly reorganize our lives according to his teachings until we reach our goal. The proof that this achievement, our victory over all negative conditions, is not merely possible but definitively promised to us, is found in these glorious words, the teaching of freedom for humanity. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Matthew 7. This is the sublime precept that we call the Golden Rule. In this case, Jesus reiterates the great law in a concise summary. This repetition follows his wonderful declaration of the fatherhood of God. The underlying explanation for the existence of the great law is the metaphysical fact that we are all fundamentally one. All parts of the great intelligence, as we are all one ultimately. To hurt another is truly to hurt oneself, and to help another is truly to help oneself. The fatherhood of God obliges us to accept the brotherhood of man, and spiritually, brotherhood is unity. Understanding this great truth includes within itself all religious knowledge, and in the ancient language, it is the law and the prophets. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide, and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. Matthew 7. There is only one path that man can follow under the sun to achieve harmony, that is, health, prosperity, mental peace, salvation, in the true sense of the word, which involves making a radical and permanent change to improve one's own consciousness. This is the only path, there is no other. For countless generations, humanity has sought its own good in every imaginable way. Countless schemes have been devised to achieve happiness by bringing about changes of some sort in the external conditions of man, leaving the quality of his mentality intact. But the result has always been the same: failure. Now, we are able to understand why this must be so. It is because the very nature of our being is such that only a change in consciousness can truly alter external conditions. This change in consciousness, the narrow gate spoken of by Jesus here, and as he says, the number of those who find it is comparatively small. Currently, this number is increasing very rapidly, although it remains relatively small. But at the time when Jesus spoke, it was even smaller. This concept that the only thing that matters is one's own consciousness, because your own conception is what you see, Jesus calls the way of life, and indicates that all other doctrines are nothing but a broad way to destruction or disappointment. So why is man apparently so reluctant to try to change his consciousness? Why does he seem to prefer almost any other method, however fanciful? Throughout history, any conceivable path has been attempted to achieve humanity's salvation, and of course all have failed. Yet man rarely attempts the narrow path unless individually compelled by irresistible pressure. This is because, as we have seen, changing consciousness is actually very difficult work that demands constant and unceasing vigilance to break mental habits, which will surely be very uncomfortable for a time. As man is naturally lazy, he tends to always take the path of least resistance, and therefore in this matter, as in other minor subjects, he adheres to fundamental principles only when pushed to do so. However, the way of life, the narrow gate, is worth much more than any trouble or effort it might require. The rewards on this path are not temporary but permanent. Every mile gained is for eternity. Indeed, changing consciousness is the only thing truly worth doing. A comparison with daily life will help illustrate this point. Let's say a man manages to remove a stain from his coat. This action will benefit him while the garment is in use, say for a few months. In contrast, suppose he develops a bodily function, such as his respiratory capacity, through appropriate physical exercises. The improvement obtained in this case will accompany him for the rest of his physical life, perhaps 50 or 70 years. And it is only for this much more important reason that if a qualitative change occurs in his consciousness. What about prayer or treatment? Then, not only will the effect of this change be felt in all phases and departments of his life, but it will accompany him for all eternity, because he will never lose it. Thieves cannot enter and steal it. As soon as you reach spiritual consciousness, you will find that all things indeed work together for the good of those who love good. You will experience perfect health, abundant prosperity, and complete and total happiness. Your health will be so good that simply living will be an unspeakable joy in itself. Your body, which will no longer be the burden faced by so many people, will be as if it were shod with salt shoes. Your prosperity will be such that you will not need to think about finances. You will always have everything necessary to undertake any plan. The world will be filled with charming people ready to help you, Others will enter your life only to do good. You will be busy with the most charming and interesting activities. All your energies and faculties will find full expression, and ultimately, you will develop the fully integrated and fully expressed personality that modern psychology envisages. One who has not glimpsed the secret of Christ's message may consider all this nothing more than a beautiful vision, too beautiful to be true. But it is precisely the essence of Christ's message. Nothing is too beautiful to be true because the love and power of God are true. It is precisely this belief that complete harmony is too beautiful to be true that prevents us from obtaining it. As mental beings, we establish the laws under which we live, and we must live under the laws that we establish. A tragic mistake often made by orthodox religious persons is to assume that God's will for them is intended to do something very dull and unattractive. Whether consciously or unconsciously, they regard God as a harsh taskmaster or a severe and puritanical father, and often their prayers practically boil down to something like this: "Please, God, give me such and such a blessing that I so desperately need, but I suppose you won't, because you won't think it's good for me." It is needless to say that such a prayer is answered, like all prayers, according to the faith of the subject. In other words, the blessing is not actually granted. God's will for us means greater freedom, greater self-expression, a broader, newer, brighter experience, better health, greater prosperity, an opportunity to serve others, and a more abundant life. If you are sick, poor, forced to do work you hate, lonely, or surrounded by people you dislike, you can be sure you are not expressing God's will. And as long as you do not express His will, it is natural to live in disharmony. Equally true is that when you do express His will, you will achieve harmony. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns, or figs from thistles? So, every good tree bears good fruit, but the corrupt tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a corrupt tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, you will recognize them by their fruits. Matthew 7. There is a fail-safe way for man to discover the truth about God, life, and himself. Is there a way for him to tell for himself what is the true religion and what is not? Which are the true temples and which are false? Which books or teachers teach truth and which are in error? How many truth-seekers are confused and troubled by the conflicting theologies and rival sects? They would wholeheartedly embrace a simple proof by which the honest seeker could discover for himself what is true. Would not a sincere Christian strive to follow the teachings of Jesus Christ if he could discover them? All kinds of people and churches tell him that they alone represent true teachings, yet they are in disagreement on vital points both in theory and practice, and each is filled with inconsistencies. If man were truly left without a simple practical proof of religious truth, he would undoubtedly be in a sad plight. But fortunately, this is not the case. Jesus, the deepest yet at the same time the simplest and most practical of teachers the world has known, answered this need and gave us proof of the truth. Your health will be so good that simply living will be in itself an unspeakable joy. Your body, which will no longer be the burden faced by so many people, will be as if it were shod with salt shoes. Your prosperity will be such that you will not need to think about finances. You will always have everything necessary to undertake any plan. The world will be filled with charming people ready to help you. Others will enter your life only to do good. You will be busy with the most charming and interesting activities. All your energies and faculties will find full expression. And ultimately, you will develop the fully integrated and fully expressed personality that modern psychology envisages. One who has not glimpsed the secret of Christ's message may consider all this nothing more than a beautiful vision, too beautiful to be true. But it is precisely the essence of Christ's message. Nothing is too beautiful to be true, because the love and power of God are true. It is precisely this belief that complete harmony is too beautiful to be true that prevents us from obtaining it. As mental beings, we establish the laws under which we live, and we must live under the laws that we establish. A tragic mistake often made by orthodox religious persons is to assume that God's will for them is intended to do something very dull and unattractive. Whether consciously or unconsciously, they regard God as a harsh taskmaster or a severe and puritanical father, and often their prayers practically boil down to something like this: "Please, God, give me such and such a blessing that I so desperately need, but I suppose you won't because you won't think it's good for me." It is needless to say that such a prayer is answered, like all prayers, according to the faith of the subject. In other words, the blessing is not actually granted. God's will for us means greater freedom, greater self-expression, a broader, newer, brighter experience, better health, greater prosperity, an opportunity to serve others, and a more abundant life. If you are sick, poor, forced to do work you hate, lonely, or surrounded by people you dislike, you can be sure you are not expressing God's will. And as long as you do not express His will, it is natural to live in disharmony. And equally true is that when you do express His will, you will achieve harmony. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Do people gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a corrupt tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a corrupt tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus by their fruits you will recognize them. Matthew 7. There is an infallible way for man to discover the truth about God, life, and himself. Is there a way for him to determine for himself what is the true religion and what is not? Which are the true temples and which are false? Which books or teachers teach truth and which are in error? How many truth-seekers are confused and troubled by conflicting theologies and rival sects? They would wholeheartedly embrace a simple proof by which the honest seeker could discover for himself what is true. Would not a sincere Christian strive to follow the teachings of Jesus Christ if he could discover them? All kinds of people and churches tell him that they alone represent true teachings, yet they are all in disagreement on vital points both in theory and practice, and each is filled with inconsistencies. If man were truly left without a simple practical proof of religious truth, he would undoubtedly be in a sad situation. But fortunately, this is not the case. Jesus, the deepest yet at the same time, the simplest and most practical of teachers the world has known, answered this need and gave us proof of the truth. Completely simple and universally applicable, it is a proof that any man or woman of any type, anywhere, can easily apply. It is as simple and direct as the acid test for gold. The simple question, does this method work? This proof is surprisingly simple that most intelligent people have disregarded it as not worth considering, forgetting that all great elementary things in life are simple. A true story always remains consistent when thoroughly examined, whereas the most plausible lie collapses somewhere when sufficiently investigated. Truth heals the body, purifies the soul, transforms the sinner, resolves difficulties, and pacifies conflicts. From this, it follows that according to Jesus, true teaching will be automatically proven by practical demonstration. They will cast out demons, speak in new tongues, handle serpents, drink deadly substances without harm, and lay hands on the sick who will recover. On the other hand, false teaching, however attractive it may be, however prestigious socially or academically, will not do all these things, or will not do them at all. By failing the test, it must be condemned. Its adherents are false prophets dressed in the sheepskin of true religion. Though they are generally sincere in their claims and pretensions, they always stand between the seeker and the saving truth, and are therefore, despite their good intentions, spiritual wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. As we clearly understand that successful demonstration is proof, we have no excuse to deviate from the path. Our progress on the path may be relatively slow for one reason or another, but at least we will be able to stay on the path. We will always know if we have strayed from the path because the manifestations will cease. For most people, it is particularly difficult to manifest in certain directions while having little difficulty in others. However, if you obtain no real demonstrations in any direction, it means you have left the path and are no longer praying correctly. You must return immediately, asserting that divine intelligence inspires you, and that you express the truth. If you do this, you will suffer no harm, even if the fruitless period seems to last quite long. In contrast, if you behave like the Pharisees, and instead of honestly admitting your error, you indulge in self-justification, then you will be in trouble. If, like some misguided ones, you say, "I demonstrate but do not wish to do so because I am too spiritual, I am above demonstrations, I am too advanced for such things, or perhaps I demonstrate in a way you cannot see," not only are you uttering absurdities, but you are doing something very akin to blaspheming against divine wisdom itself. And what is this but sinning against the Spirit? The true reason for desiring demonstrations is that they are proof of understanding. Understanding without demonstration does not exist. As within, so without. As without, so within. If you want to know how you truly are spiritually, look around you, starting with the body. There can be nothing that does not sooner or later manifest outwardly, and there can be nothing outward that does not find a correspondence inwardly. Whether it is proof of your own soul, that of a master, a book, or a church, this proof is always simple, direct, and infallible. It works. What are the fruits? You will recognize them by their fruits, for it is not the one who says to me, "Lord, Lord," who will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, "Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and perform many miracles in your name?" And then I will declare to them, "I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of iniquity." Matthew 7. Humanity takes time to realize that there is simply no way to be saved except by changing consciousness, which means consistently trying to do God's will in every department of life. Sometimes, and for certain things, we are all willing to do His will, but until there is complete alignment, in big things as well as small, there can be no complete demonstration as long as we allow anything secondary to come between us and the essential. There is no full salvation for the soul that dwells in the shadow of a falsehood, George Meredith said. This is an extraordinarily subtle danger, which we have barely faced and mastered in one direction, seems to assail us in another. It demands ceaseless vigilance and almost heroic courage. We must not allow prayer, an institution, an organization, a book, a man or woman to come between us and our direct quest for God. If we rely on anything other than our own understanding of truth, our work will cease to be fruitful. If we unduly depend on any other person, a particular master or healer, for example, we will certainly fail, probably without any fault of theirs. They may not be available to us when we need them most or for another reason. This principle also applies when people allow themselves to be enslaved by specific conditions. Many hesitate to break away from an Orthodox church out of sentimentality for breaking a family tradition. Yet, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Again, many seem to find it possible to leave an Orthodox church only to settle almost inert in one of the most liberal churches or in a spiritual center or organization, where they seem to fall back asleep under the impression that they have finally discovered the truth and no longer need to bother. As if this were not exactly the same old mistake made by the pioneers and founders of all Orthodox churches, which all began originally as reforming heresies. What do you gain by freeing yourself from one organization if you are just going to offer your newfound freedom to another? Others have developed devotion to an independent master who has completely surrendered their judgment to theirs. Still others have a favorite textbook they consider infallible. But the only thing infallible that man knows is the simple test of truth. You will recognize them by their fruits. You should gladly benefit from helpful teachings wherever you find them. Attend churches or meetings that aid you. Listen to speakers and read books that inspire you to discover yourself. But do not entrust your spiritual judgment to anyone. Thank those who have helped you and acknowledge the good received, but always be ready to move on to the next step. Remember that the truth of being deals with the infinity of the impersonal principle of life and does not lend itself to the exploitation of particular personalities or organizations. You owe loyalty to no one in the universe except to your own indwelling Christ, to your own spiritual integrity. If simply joining an organized body membership were a guarantee of spiritual understanding, our salvation would be much simpler than it is. Unfortunately, the issue is much more complex. centers, churches, schools all serve a useful purpose in providing the physical framework for the dissemination of correct knowledge through lectures, books, etc. But the real work must be done in individual consciousness. Claiming more for external things is superstition reinstated. If, when the test comes, we try to rely on having been members of a church, devotion to a master's personality, or mere knowledge of a textbook, the voice of truth will proclaim that it never knew us. Because human life and character have so many facets, the Bible addresses every issue from different angles. This section of the sermon also teaches another very important lesson. The only way to accomplish anything is by practicing the presence of God. This is the only way to achieve permanent results. This principle also applies when individuals allow themselves to be enslaved by specific conditions. Many hesitate to break free from an Orthodox church due to sentimentalism or to break a family tradition. Yet, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Again, many seem to find it possible to leave an Orthodox church only to settle almost inert in one of the most liberal churches, or in a spiritual center or organization, where they seem to fall back asleep under the impression that they have finally discovered the truth and no longer need to bother. As if this were not exactly the same old mistake made by the pioneers and founders of all Orthodox churches, which all began originally as reforming heresies. What do you gain by freeing yourself from one organization if you are just going to offer your newfound freedom to another? Others have developed devotion to an independent master who has completely surrendered their judgment to theirs. Still, others have a favorite textbook they consider infallible. But the only thing infallible that man knows is the simple test of truth. You will recognize them by their fruits. You should gladly benefit from helpful teachings wherever you find them, attend churches or meetings that aid you, listen to speakers, and read books that inspire you to discover yourself. But do not entrust your spiritual judgment to anyone. Thank those who have helped you and acknowledge the good received, but always be ready to move on to the next step. Remember that the truth of being deals with the infinity of the impersonal principle of life, and does not lend itself to the exploitation of particular personalities or organizations. You owe loyalty to no one in the universe except to your own indwelling Christ, to your own spiritual integrity. If simply joining an organized body membership were a guarantee of spiritual understanding, our salvation would be much simpler than it is. Unfortunately, the issue is much more complex. Centers, churches, schools all serve a useful purpose in providing the physical framework for the dissemination of correct knowledge through lectures, books, etc. But the real work must be done in individual consciousness. Claiming more for external things is reinstating superstition. If, when the test comes, we try to rely on having been members of a church, devotion to the personality of a master, or mere knowledge of a textbook, the voice of truth will proclaim that it never knew us. Because human life and character have so many facets, the Bible addresses every issue from different angles. This section of the sermon also teaches another very important lesson. The only way to achieve anything is through the practice of the presence of God. This is the only way to achieve permanent results. Temporary actions can be altered by the force of will, but they are only temporary, and sooner or later, anything that seems to have been accomplished in this way will disappear again, leaving everything in a worse state than before. For example, it is possible to amass great wealth solely through willpower, but money acquired in this manner eventually disappears, flying away again, leaving its deceived victim poorer than ever. Such a person does not know the truth of being, and therefore the truth does not know them and cannot help them. Dramatically expressed in an Eastern manner, this becomes chaos. I never knew you, depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Once a person has made such an error, they must stop trying to work without God, and their mistake will be forgiven as soon as they repent. Then they must immediately begin to work for provision on a spiritual basis, claiming God as their source, and acknowledging God's generosity as their own. Thus, they will build a true consciousness of prosperity, and once this is done, they can never become poor. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Matthew 7 concludes the sermon with one of these illustrations that, in their simplicity, candor, and graphic power, are unparalleled outside of Jesus' teaching. No one who has heard this parable of the two houses will ever forget it. It warns us once again of the vanity of precepts without practice, of the deadly danger of those who know the truth without honestly trying to live it. One could almost say that it is better never to have heard of the truth than to know it and not try to live it. For the human soul, one of the oldest and most important symbols is that of a building, sometimes a house and sometimes a temple, whose construction is entrusted to man. The builder is a figure as familiar in occult tradition as the shepherd or the fisherman or the king, as we found in an earlier section. The first step that the builder of a house must take is to choose solid foundations, for without them, even if the building is skillfully and meticulously constructed, it will collapse at the first serious storm. We must remember that Jesus grew up in the home and workshop of a carpenter, who at that time and in that place was also a builder, as is often the case in isolated rural areas among us. That is why this illustration came immediately to his mind. In the shifting sands of the desert, it is impossible to build anything, which is why people must live there in tents. If an Easterner wants to build something strong and permanent, they will look for a rock and build upon it. Now the rock is one of the biblical terms for Christ, and the implication is very clear. Truth, Christ, is the only foundation upon which we can securely build the temple of the regenerated soul. It is the only existing thing that is absolutely true, that never varies, that never changes, the same yesterday, today, and forever. By relying on this foundation, we will remain secure when the winds, rains, and floods of error, fear, doubt, and self-reproach strike. And they will never strike with such force because we are founded on the rock. However, to the extent that we depend on anything less than the rock, willpower, presumed material security, the goodwill of others, or our own personal resources, in short, anything that is not God, we are building on sand, and great will be our fall. And it came to pass, when Jesus had ended these sayings, the people were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Matthew 7. From this last paragraph, we are simply told that the people were amazed at his teaching. It is always so. The doctrine of Jesus Christ is totally revolutionary. It overturns all norms and methods, not only of the world, but also of any conventional or orthodox religion, as it directs our gaze from the outside to the inside, from man and his works to God. He taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. The best thing about the spiritual foundation is that you begin to know when you have received the smallest true demonstration through scientific prayer. You will have experienced something that never leaves you. You possess the testimony of truth within yourself. You no longer depend on another's word. You know it for yourself, and that is the only authority worth holding. Jesus had this authority and demonstrated it by performing works. In the next chapter of Matthew, we learn that immediately after the last discourse of this Sermon on the Mount, actually on his way back to the city, he instantly healed a leper. Thus he proved that his doctrines were not mere theories, and he demonstrated them abundantly. In conclusion, I wish to emphasize that when Jesus was in direct contact with God in speaking, he uttered the word of power.